Welcome to Orthodox Christian Theology. This is Craig Truglia, and with me today is Subdeacon Daniel Kakish. How are we doing, Subdeacon?
Good. How you doing, Craig? Thanks for having me again, brother.
I mean, it's great to have you on as always. This is a show that I felt was one both of us had to get into the can before we can't. We get older and our lives take us in directions where we get too busy for this stuff. And so just to cut right to the chase, this is about what really happened at Chalcedon. We want to get down to the dirty core, why there's this divisiveness. It's great that we're from two different sides, so that way it's not like you're getting just one side's presentation of it. A lot of my views, for example, have been already published in an article. What's it called again? The political subterfuge of Chalcedon. And so this is not like where this could be fast ones where like we have interacted on this for a long time, and I've published pretty much my views on this so that they could be scrutinized. And so let's get to the bottom of what really happened in Chalcedon. We might not solve the issue of 1,500 years of problems, but maybe at least in the year 2022, we could begin a more intelligent way forward of talking about our differences on this issue. So that being said, Subdeacon, let me just pose these two questions, because I think it's good to start with defining terms. And so we'll just start with this. Can you define for us the Eutychian heresy at its very core? And if you want, you can pose the question right back at me. What's Eutychianism? Why is it heretical?
Sure. For anyone who does not know, the Oriental Orthodox Communion officially anathematizes Eutyches. And the heresy that is attributed to him is the rejection of consubstantiality. So that the incarnate, the incarnate Word of God, Eutyches is said to have probably believed that the incarnate Word of God was not consubstantial with us, and that is where we would say he was heretical. I'm guessing you guys would agree on that.
Yeah, we would agree. It's a kind of adoptionism, if you get into at least Pope Leo's critique of Eutychian. It's like, well, how do you have two separate natures? If you consider natures personally, how do you have a human nature and a divine nature, and then it just becomes one? Right. So then, like, did the human nature then get absorbed? Was he once two different people? Now he's just one. You annihilated one of those people. So it's a sort of kind of, in the eyes of Leo, kind of Nestorian to some extent, an adoptionist to some extent. Surely this is not how Eutyches viewed himself. And so I think that's why the way you put it is very good, because I think at its core, at least intellectually, it's a denial of consubstantiality. That's what both sides agree upon. And really, I would argue Eutyches never really firmly affirms consubstantiality. In fact, quite the opposite, I'd argue. And so I think at its core, yes, this idea that Christ wouldn't be consubstantial both with, obviously, the Godhead and with mankind, that would be the Eutychian heresy. So having defined that term, let me then, I promise not to get offended, can you define or precisely clarify what in the Chalcedonian heresy, as you would view it, would you reject? Like, what about Chalcedon's heretical?
Sure. Before I get there, I just want to clarify something.
Go right ahead.
Adding to what you had previously said. So Leo's actually, his criticism of Eutyches believing in a union of hypostases, this is not where we would disagree with Eutyches. We'd actually disagree with Leo here. And we feel like it's the same objection Pope Agapetus of Rome had against Severus of Antioch, even though Severus anathematizes Eutyches for the rejection of consubstantiality. So we believe, because of what Cyril says, that there is a union of two hypostases. There's one hypostasis from the two. So we're not viewing it as two persons becoming one.
But you're speaking of in contemplation. You're not saying there was literally two different hypostases.
No,
that were one.
before the union, there are obviously not. Like there wasn't at any point in existence a human hypostasis that existed apart from the incarnation. Of course not. 100% no. So like in the womb of Mary, from the moment of the conception, immediately he's God. So, and I think I told you this before, Craig, in our liturgy, we put the coal in the censer. It has to be lit before we put it in, because the censer is Virgin Mary's womb. The coal is the incarnate Christ. We can't put the coal in if it's not lit already, because that would imply that there was a moment that the humanity existed without the divinity being united to it. And that would be a big problem. So yes, for sure. Now, your question is what our problem would be with Chalcedon.
And no, I'm going to interrupt you now for 1 second, which would just be the way you use the term hypostasis there, saying that there really were two hypostases, from my tradition, would be very peculiar, because a hypostasis would be a personal instance of the existence of a nature. And so it sounds to me peculiar. I don't know if this is something that was clarified later from your tradition by Severus, or if I'm just ignorant of my own, but it just sounds peculiar as someone who's not steeped in philosophy, and something that I don't see come up in Chalcedon specifically. And so I'm going to table that as in whether it's good or it's bad, what you just said, at least from my perspective. It just doesn't sound how we would discuss things. Unless you have an objection to me saying it just doesn't sound normal to me. How about you tell me what you do find objectionable about Chalcedonianism specifically?
Sure, and it'll probably come up later anyway. What we're talking about right now too, Craig, in the conversation, because like Flavian in 448, when he's saying one hypostasis and two physis. So this, according to Price, is an innovative formula that never happened. It never was said before. This is the formula that Chalcedon adopts. And the reason why it's innovative, according to Price, is because this distinction between hypostasis and physis had never happened. This was the first time. So in the same way that Flavian is innovating this, we would hold to the previous understanding of the definition here, to say one hypostasis and two physis in our mind is saying one hypostasis and two hypostases. Instead, we're saying there is one hypostasis from two hypostases. So our problem with Chalcedon is when it's saying that there are two natures after the union, that is the same as saying there are two hypostases after the union. Now, if Chalcedon is saying, yeah, but that's not what we mean, we would say, like, all due respect, these are the definitions of the words. We can say there are two natures in contemplation. Yeah, no problem. But not in reality.
Okay, and so, long story short, before we now embark into unpacking Chalcedon, could you concede that even in its intention that Chalcedon was espousing a Cyrillian Christology, or would you say that is impossible, that contextually they were not teaching something Cyrillian, they're teaching something crypto-Nestorian?
I don't think that they were teaching something Cyrillian, but I don't think Leo's intention was to be anti-Cyril or pro-Nestorius or either. I think Leo's intention was simply, I'm Leo of Rome. Dioscoros didn't do what I think he should have done, and this is now my revenge, essentially. That's how I view it. Is Leo excommunicated Dioscoros. Dioscoros responded, and now Leo wants to get Dioscoros out.
Now, but theologically speaking, the Chalcedon at length lays claim to being Cyrillian. Whether you agree, obviously you don't.
For sure.
They lay claim, like that's what they're saying. We're trying to expound what Cyril was expounding.
Absolutely.
Right? And so, are you saying that they were just disingenuous and they in fact expounded a alien, it sounds to me you're saying Western Christology that wasn't strictly Cyrillian or Nestorian? Is that what you're saying?
No, I think that Chalcedon has a diversity of bishops, and I think the bishops there had unique aims, and we can group them like Anatolius and Juvenal. These are pro-Cyrillian bishops, right? Eusebius, what's his name? No, Basil. Basil was the other one. Who's the bishop of Beirut? Eustathius. Eustathius of Beirut. These guys were pro-Cyrillian. It's obvious from their what they were saying there. At the same time, you have clearly very anti-Cyrillian ones, like the Antiochian party, Theodoret and his friends. I think Leo was a neutral party that he didn't care about that. So I don't think we can say there was like one kind of side that's winning out at Chalcedon. I think it's just this kind of compromise party.
And so then, what is the right way, in your view, to understand the Chalcedonian definition? If it's not any specific person's view, then what view is being expounded there?
I think we have to just take the definition for what it says, and we have to take it in the context of the canons of that council. So when we're taking the definition of faith that is happening, plus we add it with Theodoret getting exonerated without repentance, Ibas getting exonerated. We did a show, me and you, about it, and then the tome of Leo being put on everybody. I think this is the context in which we need to take the definition. Oh, and the third letter to Nestorius not being read. So all of these things are important to. Oh, and Ephesus 2 being kind of done away with as much as they wanted it to be done away with, but with the parts they wanted to keep, they kept, such as Maximus staying the Patriarch of Antioch, even though Dominus was still alive. Things like this. So I think that there were, you have to understand Chalcedon in the light of what happened in 431, 433, the controversy there coming up, 448, 449, Leo. That's how it's.
But so I'm going to try to nail that jelly to the wall, if you don't mind. So what precisely in that definition is wrong? And is it just nominally wrong, or contextually, is it conceptually wrong due to what context would require us to conceptually understand its words?
Well, it's wrong in saying that there are two natures after the union, because Cyril never said that. And no one said that, actually. And it's wrong, but even if it did say from...
And so just to pause you there, that cannot... Your position would be that can't be conceptually right in some way.
Yeah,
there's no way to interpret that rightly.
In theory, it's okay, but that's not the qualification that they gave it. And even if they said the original way that they intended to write it, from two natures, even if that stayed in, still Chalcedon would be wrong because of the other uncanonical things that happened there.
But you're not, that wouldn't be theologically wrong. You'd be talking about, you don't like the deposition, whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, you know what? We're going to beat around the bush and for solving the theological issue. And you said, what really happened in Chalcedon? Well, let's talk about the deposition. So you said the things that are uncanonical. So how about you give a perspective as to what's not canonical about Chalcedon? And by the way, you want to ask me questions, it's got to be a two-way street. It's just going to be an interview why you hate Chalcedon. So, but let's get the ball rolling there. What do you find is not canonical about Chalcedon? And then if I push back, don't feel bad about it. We'll try to draw out both our perspectives.
All the time, Craig. It's fine. So I think it's the stereotypical Oriental Orthodox objections. The restoration of Theodoret is one. He comes in. Leo brings him back. Dioscoros was like, what is he doing here? He's deposed. Everyone's like, well, he's back by Leo's authority. And then Dioscoros is like, what canon allows that to happen? And they don't even reply to Dioscoros. They just like pretend like he didn't even ask the question and keep going. And then in his trial, because of those pro-Cyril Eastern Chalcedonian bishops later.
All right, so are we done with Theodoret, or now we're going to Dioscoros?
No. I'm still on Dioscoros.
All right, still on Theodoret.
Still on Theodoret, yeah.
Okay, continue.
Yeah. So the pro-Cyrillian Eastern Chalcedonians who are at the trial of Theodoret later on in Chalcedon, they so they're insisting on his anathema of Nestorius later. But if you read Theodoret's what he says, there's no repentance there. So like he's restored based upon what? His orthodoxy is simply because he anathematizes Nestorius. That doesn't mean you're Orthodox.
Okay, so I would respond when it comes to Theodoret is that he wasn't canonically deposed by Ephesus too. It was an absentia and he wasn't even deposed. That doesn't mean that people didn't consider him a bishop. So he still appealed to Rome. Rome made its appeal. But it's sort of like, well, one, just from the Eastern Orthodox side, I think we'd both agree, Rome could they could tentatively put someone in their local communion, but in the end of the day, they're not binding. The ecumenical council is what's binding. And so that's why the validity of Ephesus II as an ecumenical council, which we had a whole debate on, and the validity of Chalcedon, for that matter, is important for really being the final word for this issue. And so the issue, I think, with Theodoret is if he was never canonically deposed, well, yes, he's, that gets recognized by Leo, but he was never not a bishop anyway. And in any event, because he's one of the accusers against Dioscorus, he was seated in the middle, not amongst the judges. And so that was to avoid the fact that, well, if he has accusations, that can't be used as a measure against Dioscorus. In any event, I mean, we could open up the minutes. I think that's with Theodoret is session 8, if I remember right.
Session 1 and session 8.
Session 8, that even then they had to, even despite the fact he was never canonically deposed by Ephesus II, that he still had to have the assent of the council to be recognized back in communion with the church. So I would say the correct way, just like with Dioscorus' original deposition by imperial fiat in session 1, to understand these things is there's tentative depositions and then there's binding depositions. There's tentative excommunications and there's binding. And so people by their own level of authority, whether it's the emperor, whether it's a bishop of a certain jurisdiction, could depose, could excommunicate, but it's only binding once it gets the consent of everyone. Otherwise, they would not be sending out, whether it's individual synodical statements for Catholic acceptance throughout the whole church, or whether you see in the council where they need people to subscribe to assent to it, and then the local synods, when they receive the council, to assent to these same things. So that to me is the real issue here, is that lack of nuance, which is Theodoret really never was actually deposed for him not to be a bishop. He wasn't the judge of Dioscorus. He was the accuser. He was seated somewhere else, for that matter. And even then, just to get rid of any confusion Ephesus II obviously caused, because it did have imperial support, they had a whole session where the church had to affirm to bring him back, in which they made sure to utterly humiliate him before bringing him back. And so let me give you the last word on that, and then we could change gears to another topic.
Well, I just wanted to ask for a clarification, Craig.
Go right ahead.
So you're saying that even though he was uncanonically deposed, because it was an imperial council, therefore he still needed to be restored because of that reason.
What I could tell you from church history is that when the emperor deposes someone, it does get treated as its law.
Mm-hmm.
And so you could kind of squeeze out of it and say, oh, this wasn't ecclesiastically accepted. But it's like sort of de facto instead of de jure. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It would be de jure.
There's a canon, some fag in the group showed, remember? He showed the canon. He said the emperor has the right to depose bishops, I think. And
the emperor has. And yeah. So, like, for example, the Pope before Pope Vigilius was deposed by imperial fiat. And what did Rome do? They went and they ordained a new Pope of Rome. So by making a new Pope of Rome, they essentially accepted the deposition. The same thing happens with a saint in our communion, Saint Pope Martin. He was deposed, and while still alive and writing to the Roman Synod, do not replace me, they replaced him, if I remember right, Pope Eugene. So this is something that happens a lot in church history. And so the fact that Theodoret was deposed is serious. He's deposed, but its ecclesiastical acceptance would have not been canonical because the Ephesus 2 didn't canonically depose him.
So the kind of last thing I just want to say about it is, regardless of the deposition situation, if it was imperial, ecclesiastical, the restoration is the questionable part for me, because his reply in the correct attempt of those guys to try to humiliate him, like you said, he doesn't even give like a satisfactory answer. If you read what he essentially says, I've been Orthodox the whole time, and so have all my teachers.
Yeah, I'm just going to, without getting to the nitty gritty, because there's only so much time, I'm just going to say I agree with you, because like, they're like, why don't you dispose Nestorius? Oh, I mean, anathematize Nestorius. Oh, I've anathematized him a million times, but why don't you say it now? I said it once, I said it a million. And like, he just won't do it because it's obvious that he doesn't want to be humbled. And that session wouldn't end until he was humbled. I think that was very much on purpose. I'm just trying to reference one thing in it before I forget. But that being said, it's in that session, he's only once identified not as a bishop, where it says the most devout bishops exclaimed, "Let Theodoret pronounce anathema now." But in the minutes, he's always identified as the most devout bishop, Theodoret. Why is this relevant for people who don't know? I know you know why it's relevant. It's relevant because when they have the title, it shows that they're officially accepted as a bishop. When they lack the title, it shows they're officially not accepted as a bishop, or whatever clergyman they happen to be, archimandrite or whatever. So why I bring this up, yes, that session took place to officially bring him back, but he was never officially out if he retained the title, right? And so that's why I pose to you the best answer is just that Ephesus 2 deposition was extra canonical, and so he never wasn't not a bishop, if that makes sense. So he had to be things had to be squared away, so to say, and that's what the 8th session did. But because if Ephesus 2 was canonical, then yes, then what Chalcedon did would have been insufficient. But because what Ephesus 2 was patently non-canonical, and I don't remember the details, but Dioscorus even writes some details trying to address the fact that there's sort of these things that make no sense canonically speaking, the depositions. I think that allows the events that occur in Chalcedon not to be a canonical issue. Because how could it be a canonical issue if he was never canonically deposed, if that makes sense?
Well, the bishops who tried him at Chalcedon, they are the previous Ephesus 2 bishops. Yeah. They're the ones who want it. So that's probably why they didn't give him the honorifics, because they still recognized his deposition, you know.
Yes, and obviously those who wrote the minutes, who knew why that session was taking place, gave it to him. But I would, I could turn back to the end of that session, but I bet you by the end of it, after he anathematized it, he's called a bishop again. In fact, that's exactly what it says in verse 15. All the most devout bishops, the ones that didn't use his title, they say, Theodoret is worthy of the see, restore the Orthodox one to the church. This is after he anathematized. May the church receive back its shepherd. So, and then in the next verse, you got the papal legates calling him Venerable Bishop Theodoret. So that to me, without saying they had a 2/3 majority, whatever vote, it just shows he was then recognized for the people who didn't recognize him once he did the anathema. So that to me does show that with all good intentions, it was squared away, that issue, as much as you could square that away. So are there any other canonical issues before we get into the theology you want to address? We could table Ebus, being that we had a whole show on that. Yeah. Do you want to talk about Dioscorus deposition, or do you think that's not an issue?
I think that with Dioscorus, I don't know about the whole thing regarding, the judging of enemies and all that, but I do believe that the council was set up in order to depose him.
Oh yeah, it was a stacked deck against him. I don't think he knew he was walking into that, because otherwise the Egyptian Synod never would have let themselves be captive in Constantinople. He attended thinking there was a way to maneuver things. I don't know, maybe the primary sources don't exist, but I wouldn't be surprised if there were even significant bribes before the council where Dioscorus might have thought he had a fighting chance, and the sort of politicking that had with the imperial court. Again, I'm not saying that did happen. We know stuff like that happened at Ephesus, for example, and we both accept St. Cyril. So I don't even say that in a bad way. But yeah, my opinion is he was brought into Chalcedon. Remember, he wasn't seated initially among the accused, thinking that he and his synod had a fair shake at this. And then immediately he was put on trial. And then became very clear where this was heading as it transpired. And obviously the whole thing where all the bishops like Juvenal and whatnot go to the other side, their positions probably would have been known before the council initiated, right? Not to Dioscorus, right? And so a lot of that would have been known. But whether or not this shows, all right, he was out-politicked or whatever, all right, he was out-politicked, I think we could agree. I would argue, though, what actually happened procedurally wasn't extra-canonical, it was canonical. And so you can say, well, boo-hoo, he was out-politicked, but the point is he was still canonically deposed. And being canonically deposed, then that would also put aside Chalcedon procedurally having problems, because I just don't see the evidence of it. Let me give you an opportunity maybe to either agree or to put that into dispute.
Yeah, I think if Chalcedon was viewed by us to be an Orthodox council in theology, then that Dioscorus' deposition would be valid. That's right.
And so you have no problems with the procedure. It's just that as a matter of, and just so people are aware, like we have a Saint Maximus that speaks of ecumenical council the same way. If a council is not Orthodox, then the procedural stuff doesn't mean anything, right? That would invalidate it. Okay, so I guess then that could get us to the theology then. So meaning, it sounds to me the way Chalcedon was actually procedurally held, though a little divisive and a little intimidating and a little political, wasn't really procedurally wrong, right? If we could establish that. The issue then would be whether its theology has major issues. Could we establish that now, or is there points of difference where you say, well, this is not reconcilable and we could table that? I just want to see if we could establish that.
Yeah, I still think the 3 chapters situation is still a problem. I mean, Theodoret and Ibas, I know Theodore of Mopsuestia wasn't really involved in that. But
that'd also be theological, though, at its core, right? It would be the idea if you have heretics taking part in the council.
Yeah. I wasn't thinking of it that way, but yeah, you're right.
Okay, so it all connects to the theology, just to reduce it for our audience. Okay, so I guess maybe it would work if maybe I just say why I think it's Orthodox, and then you dispute it, and this would help us maybe unpack the first session and the subsequent sessions.
Sure.
To me, I would put forward that I think if we understand what Nestorius' position is at its very core, and just so people know, this is all in my article, so there's no fast ones here. Like, Nestorius literally did teach that Christ was 2 different hypostases. That's in the Bazaar of Heraclitus. So he literally is what he's accused of. All right, that's not him out of context. All right, so that's what actual Nestorianism is. Actual Eutychianism, we both agree, has to do with this denial of double consubstantiality, that Christ is really of the same essence with mankind and the same essence with the other hypostases of the Godhead. And so we know what Eutychianism is. Now, what I would argue is that the theology of the West was essentially Cyrillian, just not with Cyrillian language. And my opinion would be is what is Cyrillian and Western Christology of the 5th century is there's one individual, one person, whatever word you want to use for that. There's one person who has 2 natures, and those 2 natures be human and divine. All right. And so to me, the real issue would be, it would have to be demonstrated that either that's an insufficient synopsis of Cyrillian Christology, there's something seriously missing, and so then you can at least argue that there's something seriously missing from the Western Christology, or the Western Christology wouldn't accurately be that, and I am misrepresenting Western Christology. So I'm going to, if presuming that all Chalcedon is doing is trying to show where Western Christology and Cyrillic Christology are the same, and thereby that would simply make Chalcedon Cyrillian because they're the same. Unless that's wrong, then Chalcedon would be Orthodox and it'd be great. So maybe to situate for you to start picking this apart, Subdeacon, could you talk about maybe whether that's an incorrect synopsis of Cyrillianism, what I just said, one person, two natures?
Yeah, I don't think Cyril believed or said that anywhere, but I also don't think that the West agreed with Cyril. This is my opinion. I don't think that the pre-Cyril or pre-Chalcedon, even pre-Chalcedon Western fathers, or not all of them, but many of them, I don't think they were Cyrillian. I think there's like scholarly, clearly links between Augustine and Theodore of Mopsuestia. That's for sure. That's a fact. And there's also links between Augustine and Leo. Leo was a student of Augustine's Christology. Even defenders of the faith like Hilary and others, their Christology doesn't line up with Cyril. So I don't think that the Latins were very good at Christology, quite frankly. The Latins,
but again, we're speaking conceptually now, because right, if the word, we already agree the words are different, languages are different, so they're by default going to be different. But conceptually speaking, like reading from the third letter to Nestorius, the word that is of God the Father is God alike in man, right? And so if the West understood God alike in man to be a divine nature and a human nature, then what conceptually about that would be different, right? One person, two natures, or one person, God and man, right? So, you hear Protestants say this, Christ the God-man. That's what they mean because they don't know anything about Chalcedon.
Yeah.
So what's wrong with that?
There's nothing wrong with it when we're talking like me and you, whatever, it's like slang language. But when you're trying to define precisely Christology and you're talking about a man who does this, this, and this, and then the Son of Man does these things, but the Son of God does these things, then you have a problem because now you have two sons.
I agree. If it's literally meant that that the divinity did X and another humanity did Y, and it's not meant that the same persons who did it, but it's the divine within that person that did X and the human within that person that did Y. Right? That would be the issue. And so if we are on the same page in agreement with that, then let me ask you this. Would you concede or dispute that Western Christology of the 5th century leading to Chalcedon would have affirmed that we're talking about one person doing things divinely and one person doing things humanly?
I think that Western Christology would say that there is one person, but I think that they actually would describe a prosopic union, like if you have two people with a rope tied around them. Like if you read the tome of Leo, it's hard to understand that to be the actions of one person in both natures. Like it doesn't. It's nature's acting. It's not the person who's acting. And if a nature acts, that's a person.
Yeah, but shouldn't we take Leo at his words when he's saying it's one person doing these things? Wouldn't that be the right way of interpreting Leo?
I mean, yeah, the Nestorians also say it's one person. Nestorius has always said one person. He's never said two persons.
But Nestorius did say two hypostases, and Nestorius did give an illustration. I'm forgetting which sermon he made against the Theotokos. But he actually said he gives an illustration, and you know what, maybe I will read it because I think the question will be, would Leo give the same illustration? So I'm going to quote Nestorius. He says, for the sake of illustration, and this is in first sermon against the Theotokos. By the way, it's also quoted in Ephesus 1 as a bad thing. Right? So he says, for the sake of an illustration of what is meant, right? What is his idea of how do you pronounce it? Where do you better than me with pronunciation?
Hypostasis?
No, prosthetic union.
Oh, prosopic.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah. That the Nestorian one says, for the sake of illustration of what is meant, note this. If you want to lift someone up who's lying down, right? So he's already talking about you and someone lying down. So we already got two people. Do you not touch body with body by joining the other person? Lift up the one while you remained what you were. This is the way to think of the mystery of the incarnation, right? So, like, when we talk of concepts, the most, I would wager that the most important way to understand a concept is an illustration, right? Like, because they're literally drawing. This is really what I mean when I say this, right? There's an expression from Pope Gregory the Great where he says, believe facts, not words. Believe facts rather than words, he says, right? So the illustration is trying to say, this is what I really think it means, instead of quibbling over what the words supposedly mean. He's telling you what he really means. And so when Nestorius tells you what he really means, he's literally talking about a person picking up a whole other disabled person, right? The divine picking up this a mere human being. and the fact he's holding them together makes them one. So obviously, if you guys watch that movie Stuck on You with Matt Damon and that other dude and they're conjoined twins, they're two people. Doesn't matter they got that piece of skin between them holding them together. They're two different people. And quite frankly, that's the one person that Nestorius' illustration's describing. It's describing Stuck on You. It's Matt Damon and that other guy. It's two different people, right? And so I want to ask you then, is Leo conceptually identical to that then? When he speaks of two natures, or would you concede that that's not what he means by two natures?
So with the illustration that Leo gives, Leo again in the tome and in other places, he's giving an illustration of the man doing this thing, but the word doing something else. The man and the word are not adjectives of divinity and humanity, or even synonyms. They're the second person of the Trinity versus the one who's born of Mary, the Word and the man. So in the same way, and with Nestorius, I just want to say, because he said two hypostases. Nestorius is saying two hypostases. To be honest, he's saying that because he's honest. Like, he's not doing the new Flavian formula of one hypostasis and two physis, because that was unheard of before. So Nestorius was saying two hypostases because that's what physis is. So for Leo was speaking in Latin, so he didn't have this problem of hypostasis, physis. It didn't matter to him. He was saying one person, two natures. That's what Leo said. Leo, it was like personae and natura, I think it was. So with Leo, though, the illustrations that he gives are, to the Oriental Orthodox, equally as bad.
Okay, and so help me understand how they're equally as bad. I'll just read part of the Tome of Leo, and maybe you could demonstrate to me what precisely is bad from your point of view.
Sure.
So, like, the Tome says, the birth of the flesh reveals human nature. Birth from a virgin is a proof of divine power. A lowly cradle manifests the infancy of the child. Angels' voices announce the greatness of the Most High. Herod evilly strives to kill one who is like a human being at the earliest age. The Magi rejoice to adore and bend a knee, one who is Lord of all. When he came to be baptized by a precursor, John, the Father's voice spoke thunder from heaven to ensure that he did not go unnoticed, because divinity was concealed by the veil of the flesh. Accordingly, the same one who is the devil craftily tempts as man, the angels dutifully wait on as God. All right, so, and I'll say one more sentence. Hunger, thirst, weariness, sleep are patently human, but to satisfy 5,000 people 5 loaves, dispense living water to the Samaritan woman, a drink of which will stop her from being thirsty ever again, to walk on the surface of the sea with feet that do not sink, to rebuke the storm and the level the mounting waves. There can be no doubt these are divine. So from what I just read, what's conceptually wrong about that? From your perspective.
That's not the part that I was referring to in the tome.
So you could affirm that part. So you think he could be onto something there?
It's possible. I mean, I didn't really analyze that part enough, I guess. But,
okay, so you don't know. You're agnostic about it. So what's the precise part that you don't like? Maybe we could share a screen.
Where he talks about the word and the man. I'm going to pull up the tome here.
Yeah, just give me like a keyword or something. And
you could just put what is proper to the word.
Proper to the word.
Yeah.
Proper is a big word. 1 second. Does this sound right? The activity each form is what is proper to it in communion with the other. That is, the word performs what belongs to the word. That one?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm gonna make this bigger and share screen, right? Making it bigger don't help you if I don't share it. So 1 second. So we don't want dead air. So I'm just gonna say I don't want dead air, so there's not dead air. How's that sound?
Great.
All right, so ironically, all right. So I'll read it, and then you could tell me stop when it becomes really objectionable.
All right.
There is nothing unreal about this oneness, since both the lowliness of the man and the grandeur of the divinity are in mutual relation. As God is not changed by showing mercy, neither is humanity devoured by the dignity received. The activity of each form is what is proper to it in communion with the other. That is, the word performs what belongs to the word, and the flesh accomplishes what belongs to the flesh. One of these performs brilliant miracles, the other sustains acts of violence. As the word does not lose its glory, which is equal to that of the Father, so neither does the flesh leave the nature of its kind behind. You want me to keep going? Does it get more?
That's fine.
Okay. So tell me what's objectionable conceptually about that.
So the objection is that the word incarnate is what is doing the activities proper to the divinity and the activities proper to the humanity at once. So God in the flesh, who suffered for us and was tired for us and hungry for us, and he died for us, because like St. Athanasius says, if it wasn't God in the flesh who dies for us, then how can we have salvation?
And so, and this gets into the words escaping at the moment, but the theopaschism. But that being said, it's, to me, conceptually, it doesn't seem like he's saying there's two people. I would say in this English translation, I can't speak the Latin or Greek because I don't read either, where he says the word performs what belongs to the word and the flesh accomplishes what belongs to the flesh. Technically speaking, because it's the word incarnate, the word was crucified in the flesh, right?
Yeah.
And so, the word hunger, the word suffered. It's just the word not according to its divinity. His divinity suffered, because that's impossible.
Right.
Divinity is impassible.
Yeah.
And so I think just the charitable way of interpreting this, being that he says one of these performs brilliant miracles, the other sustains acts found, and so the word does not lose its glory, which is equal to that of the Father. He seems to be that, I'm trying to find the right part of this that we were just reading. As God is not,
let me
go right ahead.
I think the Tome of Leo can be interpreted in an Orthodox way, even agreeing with Oriental Orthodoxy, if it was in a vacuum, but because of its own context and the context that surrounds it, that's the problem. So even within the tome itself, if there's a section I have, if you want me to read it, or I can wait, whatever you want.
Okay, so let's go to the next section of the tome that you find objectionable, and then you can tell us the context surrounding this, why you think this proves why it's objectionable.
So the tome is coming in the context of the condemnation of Eutyches in 448. Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. So then Ephesus 2 gets the tome. They refuse to read the tome. They don't condemn the tome. They just don't read it. Even though Dioscoros in the minutes says he asked for it to be read and whatever, but it was not read. So then Leo gets mad, excommunicates everybody. Again, it's very important to remember the tome was not condemned at this point by anybody, and Leo was not excommunicated by anybody at this point. Leo is the one who's excommunicating. So, and the reason for the tome being problematic is precisely because of this. It's the intolerance of the tome and not vice versa. So where this is maybe the Latin way of talking, like we implied earlier, the Latin way of talking is now encroaching on becoming the universally binding way of that's what he wants. to talk, and they're telling him, we don't like this. We'll leave your stuff to you, but that's not how we talk here. So here's the evidence from the tome itself that that's what it was trying to do. This is from the tome. But when Eutyches, on being questioned in your examination of him, the tome is the Flavian, right? So, but when Eutyches, on being questioned in your examination of him, answered, I confess that our Lord was of two natures before the union, but after the union I confess one nature. I am astonished, Leo's talking, I am astonished that so absurd and perverse a profession as this of his was not rebuked by a censure on the part of any of his judges. It is just as impious to say that the only begotten Son of God is from two natures before the incarnation, as it is unlawful to assert that after the Word became flesh, there is one nature in him. So saying one nature in God, in the incarnate Word, that is not allowed. Absolutely. That regardless of who's talking or when or why or where, to Leo, it is absolutely not allowed ever to say there's one nature in the incarnate Word, according to the tome. So Leo, maybe ignorantly, is excommunicating Cyril himself by saying that.
And so, again, we're speaking conceptually, because if I remember that passage right, and it's not within the link I have here, so I can't bring it up, because I've read the letter. I think it's letter 26 or something, actually, in Leo's corpus. But he's making the point that he's actually criticizing, he's scolding Flavian, because the idea is like, well, how could he tolerate the fact what he's saying is obviously adoptionist? This is what I was referring to earlier. So to me, that seems to be his actual point. He's taking what you think he said literally, and taken literally, then you're saying there's literally these two different individuals that become one individual. It sounds even more ridiculous in the story. So it says there's always two individuals. At least that is logical. What Eutyches says sounds completely irrational. And so that's what he's criticizing him for.
But that's why I'm saying he's ignorant, because Cyril himself says that he's one hypostasis from two hypostases. So, like, if this is new to him and his first time hearing someone ever say that, it's Eutyches, that means he never heard Cyril before.
Well, he might have not heard him in Latin, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But which is more the reason why we would have to be charitable. Like, all right, well, someone hasn't heard Cyril and he says X words. Doesn't mean he disputes what Cyril said conceptually and theologically. And so from what you've put forward, in my opinion, and you could push back, but from what you put forward, both those passages fail to demonstrate that. Because in the second passage, there's no definitive refutation of Cyril, and he actually explains why he finds it objectionable, and he doesn't explain Cyrillian theology is why he finds it objectionable. He explains that literally this Eutychian adoptionist Eutychian idea is what he finds objectionable. It just sounds crazy to him. The other thing that we were just reading, the very next sentence stated where he made clear we're speaking about one individual. So the concept conceptually, he's really saying the same thing as Cyril, even if there's just things in language that you don't find hunky-dory. But what I don't find is anything in context that would demand us to understand Leo contrary to how he explains himself, which is we're talking about one individual doing things according to divine nature or divinely, and human nature humanly, but it's the same individual doing it. And he's not talking about two conjoined individuals like stuck on you, which Nestorius was. So we know he wasn't doing that. And so if he wasn't doing that, then it seems to me we have to take him at his word. That would be the honorable thing to do. So let me give you the last word on the tome, and then we will move forward with session 1 of Chalcedon.
Yeah, I don't think that Leo's ignorance of the Christology, that the Christological fighting that is happening in the Greek-speaking world is an excuse or a good reason. I don't think that just because he hasn't read Cyril or doesn't really understand what Nestorius is saying, I don't think that that is okay, and we should assume automatically that Leo intends to be saying something orthodox. Just because Leo knows that at Ephesus 1, Cyril was the good guy and Nestorius was the bad guy, he shouldn't just, like, that shouldn't let us assume that Leo automatically agrees with Cyril. When he speaks of Cyril, he speaks of him positively. But there's nothing that Leo says that helps us know that Leo actually has read Cyril or understands anything that Cyril has said. So by Leo saying what he's saying, if somebody cut out the name Leo and just put the quotes somewhere, and then you have to guess who said the thing, right? And then you have Nestorius quotes and Leo quotes and whatever, I'm not going to be able to differentiate between them, or Theodore Mopsuestia even.
I think, and I personally think I would be able to, because of the emphasis on the same eternal only begotten of the Father is the one who assumed their human nature. This assumption language, for example, is also found in Dioscorus. So he's not talking about two individuals. It just, to me, it seems so clear, and this may be a big reason why we have the divisiveness as communions, maybe not you and I personally, that we do, because we cannot give, to me, this seems so clear, and for you, it seems so clearly the other way. I mean, like, the distinctive character of each nature being preserved and coming together into one person. So this to me, that's quoting Leo. The quote now Cyril, in the second letter to Nestorius, the two natures being brought together into a true union. How's that any different? The distinctive character of each nature in one person, Cyril now says, two natures together, one union, right? One person. So how's this any different? I really can't see it personally.
Yeah, so it's different because, again, the two examples that I gave, the first one was the Word doing things and the humanity doing things. That's number one. The second thing is where he's saying that it's never allowed to say that there's one nature in the incarnate Word, which Cyril did say. So both things disagree with Cyril.
But I think this is not conceptually a bridge too far. I'm going to take the charitable approach to this. And the reason I take that is because you don't affirm that divinity suffered. You affirm that God suffered, but not his divinity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're saying the same thing.
But I'm not saying that only Jesus of Nazareth died, because that's who the man is. I'm saying that God incarnate died. Leo is saying the Word didn't die, only the man, which I would never say.
It just seemed to me that conceptually speaking, he's speaking of nature, because he means nature not as a independent individual that is suffering. And I just don't know how much more clearly Leo could have said it according to the paradigm he was working with.
Yeah, that's why I'm telling you is I don't think the Latins were good at Christology.
Okay.
The issue is that it's that they tried to make their way the way. It's not that they were talking like that, because they've been talking like that. But it's like they tried to make it, this is the standard. And that's what the problem was, that the tome had to be universally accepted. For what? Just let it be a local thing for you guys in the West. Why does it have to apply to us?
Now, I actually personally think the way Leo words things is actually way more concise than what you see in the Cyrillian tradition, because a lot of issues that got worked out in the church in subsequent centuries with monoenergism versus dinoenergism, monothelitism versus dinothelitism, by applying the logic of Leo, you could actually maintain the Aristotelian physical categories that they're all presuming upon. And when you don't do that, you start coming up with ideas which actually invalidate that. And if this is something where, again, speaking in Aristotelian physics, we're Christians, so why do we care? But these are the things that we're actually philosophically arguing about. So you actually have to have these shared philosophical premises for even any of this to make sense. And so, for example, to ignore the distinctions that Leo was making, which in my communion would be necessary, would lead someone to take a view that will is something hypostatic, when in fact, will, according to Aristotelian categories, must be derived from essence or substance, right? So if God is consubstantial with us and God consubstantial with the other persons of the Holy Trinity, then he has to have two wills for the just the Aristotelian category to even make sense. Now you can say, well, we should be able to reevaluate these categories and redefine them. And then we could have that argument about concepts, that whether these are conceptually the same or different. The scholars would argue they're conceptually the same. I actually don't think so when it comes to diaphelitism or dioenergism. But that aside, that to me vindicates what Pope Leo actually did. Like, just so people know, I'm not lying down saying, Pope, it's okay, we disagree. Well, the West just wasn't very good at theology. And I'm not saying, well, the East wasn't very good at theology. I'm just saying what Pope Leo put together actually solved a lot of issues if you were to listen to it. Because you have to go down these pretty weird roads to try to then work through those issues, ignoring the categories, Leo said. So now let me actually give you the last word on that. I just wanted to speak to that.
So Craig, our belief in the wills corresponds to the beliefs in the natures. We're just like we are miaphysite, we're miathalite. So we believe that there's one nature from the two. There's one actor, and the one actor has one action. It's the way of willing is essential, like you're saying. So, but the act is hypostatic, and that's where I'm saying, like, the actor and the
and again, just so my point would be that philosophically would be kind of like nonsense at that time. The idea that will derives from hypostasis, because will derives from substance and essence.
Yeah, I don't know anything about philosophy, and I don't know. I don't even know, like, these Greek words is because I hang out with Copts all the time. Otherwise, I don't know them either. Like Syriacs, as you know,
sure, they don't use words.
We don't have anything to do with any of this. Like even the whole Chalcedon controversy, that's between Alexandria and the Greeks. So. But I'm trying my best. I think hypostasis and essence are related words. I don't know.
Okay, and I'll admit my ignorance about stuff too. We've had this back and forth in text. I remember you saying something really philosophical. Maybe you're right. I don't know. I couldn't tell you that. So anyway, let me get the ball rolling session 1, and then we could start quibbling about that. So as session 1 unfolds, I feel what we start seeing unfolding is what I've been expounding is that the conceptual similarities of what we saw in Constantinople 448 are just made more clearly, like with Basil of Caesarea and whatnot, where he says specifically this idea of being in two natures after the incarnation means double consubstantiality, that they're not meaning something different by this. And so to me, the whole thrust of Chalcedon is the affirmation of double consubstantiality. And so what really hinges upon this is whether or not that's affirmed or it's not. And despite all these chances to affirm that, it appears to me that Eutyches and Dioscorus, hitching himself to the Eutychian bandwagon, failed to do so. And so that to me is the whole context in very few words what went down in session 1. So now let me pose it back to you to maybe pose a counter narrative or to clarify details that you think call that into question.
Yeah, so I don't think that to say two natures after the union is the only way. If Chalcedon's whole point of doing that is just to confirm consubstantiality, then there were a lot better and easier ways of doing it than saying two natures after the union. Two natures after the union, to say, again, back to Flavian's formula, that's exactly what it was. Flavian's formula from 448 is what 451 affirms to be the formula there. So they attribute it to Leo and Chalcedon, but it was really Flavian, not Leo, who came up with the formula. Leo was speaking in Latin. So when the tome was translated into Greek, probably by Theodoret or somebody, whoever translated the tome into Greek translated it accordingly, correspondingly to Flavian's. Otherwise, there's not an infallible way to translate a thing. So Flavian saying one hypostasis and two physis, for the first time creating this distinction, this nuance between hypostasis and physis, to be used not as synonyms. Then Chalcedon adopts this, but why would anybody think that, okay, that's okay, and these are actually two different things, and hypostasis means person and physis means nature? Why would that be assumed that everybody is supposed to be like, yeah, that makes sense, that's okay, that's good, even though there's no precedence for it?
Well, it seems to me because it was a clarification called for to counter Eutychianism. So, like the volume 1, page 191, which is the first session of the council in the Price translation, we see that he. This actually might not be the right quote, actually. So I'm just going to read it. He says, this is Basil. We therefore accept all that's Cyril's writings and letters as true and full of piety, and we worship the one Jesus Christ, our Lord, acknowledged in two natures. As a reflection of the Father's glory, he possessed one of these in himself eternally, while as born from a mother for our sake, he took the other nature from her and united to himself hypostatically, and so is called the perfect God and the Son of God, and also perfect man. And so it seems to me when he explains what in two natures means, he's trying to make clear that we're talking about the divine hypostasis assuming human nature, right? That's the actual point at issue here. And that being that's the case, that's why double consubstantiality is true. And that's what he keeps arguing for in favor of double consubstantiality. So to me, that's why he used those terms. It's because Ephesus 2, I'm going to argue, actually rejects double consubstantiality. You're probably going to argue the opposite, but I'm going to argue rejects double consubstantiality. And if at the very least it didn't reject it, it was so unclear on the issue that it demanded a clarification like Basil gave, which would have been, I think, justified by Chalcedon. And so, because if we could even have a debate where someone watching this would not be sure whether or not Ephesus 2 really affirmed double consubstantiality or in fact rejected it, this shows clarifications necessary, and which would have justified what Basil did.
So I don't think that Oriental Orthodox would necessarily take this absolute position of every single bishop that accepted Chalcedon was anti-Cyril or didn't interpret it in a Cyrillian way or something. So it could be that Basil is oversimplifying it just to that. But with Cyril, with Ephesus 431, even Nicaea, consubstantiality was already affirmed. So Ephesus 1, after the fact, when the Antiochians are writing their refutations of the 12 anathemas of Cyril, they're claiming that they are defending the consubstantiality of Christ. And by the way, those writings I think are also condemned by EO, if I'm correct. So Cyril in his response to say, I believe in consubstantiality, you guys are not interpreting me correctly. He never once said that there are two natures after the union in his defense. Instead, he affirmed one nature after the union and still consubstantiality. In the same way, Oriental Orthodoxy condemns Eutyches for not believing in consubstantiality, while at the same time, we still believe in one nature after the union. You don't need to believe in two natures after the union to believe in consubstantiality. It's never been needed before Chalcedon.
And so, to me, the clarification that after the union, Christ maintains consubstantiality with mankind and consubstantiality with the other person, the Holy Trinity, seems to me eminently necessary because there would have been no consubstantiality before the incarnation. So it seems to be the only logical, rational way to actually discuss the issue, which I think that alone would more than justify its clarification. But as I was referring to before, I think the way Ephesus 2 rejects double conceptuality, in my view, and we're going to go read it so we can see whether or not I'm interpreting it right or not, I think also demanded the clarification that Basil and then the actual decree of Chalcedon in the 5th session gives. So I'm going to share screen first. We're going to look at Ephesus 2. This is page 422 in the open source translation. I know you got a much more nifty, like year 2006 translation, so just bear with me.
No problem. No problem.
We can't get that one on screen, you know, but we could get this one on screen.
Cool.
So I'm gonna make it a little bigger. And so let me go a little bit. So, and when these things were said, the Holy Synod at Ephesus said, so this is Ephesus 2 speaking, nobody proclaims our Lord to be two after the incarnation. Nobody divides that which is indivisible. Nestorius did this. Thus Nestorius thought, but not the bishop of Amasia, not the bishop of Masia of Sinope. Dioscorus, the bishop of Alexandria, said, wait a little to hear other blasphemies. You indeed charge only Nestorius. Lo, there are now many Nestorians. And in another place, the notary Flavian made deposition against Eutyches, saying, so now they're reading from Constantinople 448, so people are aware. So notary Flavian, this is now quoting 448, and what Dioscorus is saying is, look at all this blasphemous stuff from Constantinople 448. So here's the stuff. Of the two natures before the union, he said not two, but worships one nature of God who took body. And in another place, he said concerning him, I confess that he is perfect God and perfect man who was born, but he had not flesh consubstantial with us. All right, so this is what Constantinople 448 is rejecting in Eutyches. And again, he made another deposition concerning him, saying, he said, spare me speaking of two natures, and our Lord are investigating into the nature of my God. And when the same Eutyches was asked by Flavian to affirm that his flesh was consubstantial with us, he spoke thus, because I confess the body of God, I do not confess that the body of God is the body of man. But it is a human body, and I affirm that our Lord took the body of the Virgin. But it is befitting and proper to speak of the Virgin as consubstantial with us. This also, my Lord, I confess. Nevertheless, of the only begotten Son of God, I confess that he is Lord and King with the Father, with whom he is also seated and glorified. For I am not speaking of the same nature when I deny that he is the Son of God. Florentius said to him, do you affirm of our Lord that he is consubstantial with us and of two natures at the incarnation by the Virgin or not? So obviously we see that Florentius thought that Eutyches was being facetious when he said specifically, but if it's fitting and proper to speak of the Virgin's consubstantial with us, this also, my Lord, I confess, right? But if it's fitting. So he doesn't confess it if it's not fitting. So this explains why Florentius says, do you affirm or not that he's consubstantial with us and of two natures? Eutyches said, I confess that our Lord was of two natures before the union, but after the union I confess him to be of one nature, right? He doesn't make mention of double constantiality. Then how does Ephesus 2 respond? Dioscorus said, and the Holy Synod at Ephesus with him said, we all assent to this. Yes, all of us. Again, there was read the conversation of Basil, Bishop of Seleucia, with Eutyches of Flavian Synod. And if you not speak of two natures after the union, you speak of mixture and of confusing. And when this sentence was read at Ephesus, immediately Basil stood up and denied that sentence to be his, and saying the sentence which they affirm, I said, I did not say in those words, I'm certain that I did not speak of them. I think I went too far at this point. Oh, wait, I wanted to go to the bottom here. Thank you for your patience. Okay. So it goes back to that whole back and forth of Eutyches. Bishop, again from the documents of Flavian, Eusebius, Bishop of Durlium, after reading Cyril's letter, said, does Eutyches assent to what has now been read of the blessed Cyril and confess that there's a union of the two natures in one person, one substance, or not? Florentius said, do you hear, Archimandrite, what your accuser says? Eutyches said, yes, I affirm our Lord to be of two natures. Eusebius of Durlium said, do you confess two natures, my Lord Archimandrite, after the incarnation? And do you affirm of Christ in the flesh that he is consubstantial with us? And when this was read, the Holy Synod at Ephesus said, take and burn Eusebius. This man ought to be burnt alive. This man ought to be divided into as he is divided. Dioscorus, Bishop of Alexandria, said, is it pleasing to you to affirm after the incarnation two natures? The Holy Synod said, anathema to him, be to him who affirms so, and on it goes. So why do I read this? Because I think this conversation read as a whole, we see the obvious conceptual coupling of double consubstantiality with two natures after the union. That's its meaning. And we see Eutyches deliberately avoid it. And we see the fact that the Council of 448 is needling Eutyches to accept double consubstantiality and two natures after the hypostatic union, meaning double consubstantiality, that because he refuses to, we see that Dioscorus in Ephesus 2 anathematize Eusebius, tell him that he should be killed, and Dioscorus calls these blasphemies. But from everything we've read thus far, I think together, Daniel, and now I'm going to give you a lot of time to respond, it seems to me these aren't blasphemies. This is conceptually the same thing as what Cyril was saying, that in one union, there's these two natures. That's exactly what Cyril said. So how's this any different than Cyril? Why is this now blasphemous?
Because two natures, I understand, like from your perspective, the two natures after union is just to say that for consubstantiality. There's nothing more to it. But for the Oriental Orthodox ear, the Cyrillian ear, to say, especially for the Greek-speaking world at the time, to say that there are two phusis after the union is the same as saying two hypostases after the union. So just so like the Antiochians were telling Cyril, you have to say two natures after the union to affirm consubstantiality, and he was telling him that's Nestorianism. It's the same thing. We can affirm consubstantiality without it. So Eutyches is anathematized by us for rejecting consubstantiality, but his answers, he affirmed consubstantiality at the Council of Ephesus too, but not to say
can I press you on that if you don't mind me interrupting? Where does he affirm double consubstantiality? It seems to me the opposite.
No, he says it in actually even in 448 he says it in 448 he says it, because you say it, I'll say it, like that. And then in 448,
but that why would that convince me? He shouldn't have to say it out of compulsion. That's not an actual confession, and in fact, that's what they say. Confessing out of compulsion is not an actual Orthodox confession of faith. So you're saying him being compelled to say it is an Orthodox confession of faith?
Well, what do you want if they're compelling him? They're already doing the compelling. So anything he'll say is going to be compulsion. Isn't it the same for Theodoret though?
But see, if you're going to, now you got to be consistent, because if Theodore is a heretic, as you say, and he's being disingenuous, and you say, well, that's one of the big reasons of Chalcedon why they're wrong. Mm-hmm. Okay, then you could say the fact that he was allowed back in communion, they should have never let that guy back in communion, but he was never properly deposed. So that's a whole other argument that really doesn't affect Chalcedon. But this does affect Ephesus too, because the whole interpretation of 448 hinges upon, I argue, whether or not we take what Eutyches said according to literal words, such as, I now acknowledge it, since you now say I agree with it all, but now since your sacredness has said it, I will say it. Said that 3 times, by the way. And I say these things since you now order it. And so taking Eutyches at his words, he's saying he doesn't really mean it. You're forcing him to say it. Unlike Theodoret, who's saying, I said it once, I said it 1,000 times, that this is the case. And he was just trying to avoid saying, but at least he was pretending he meant it. Eutyches is not pretending he meant it. He says, since you've ordered it, is why he's confessing double consubstantiality. And when they, the way they interpret his words by persistent questioning, it's obvious that they know he's being sarcastic, which is why they keep asking him. And on top of this, when they finally pose it to him one final time, he refuses to affirm double consubstantiality. He makes, I accept of two natures, but not one, but not two. And after he says that, as a result, then they condemn him. So it seems to me that the consistent way of interpreting Eutyches is he was never affirming double constantiality. That's what everyone understood in 448. That's what Henoticon understood, in that they condemned the Eutyches for denying double constantiality. It seemed to me everyone knew he was denying double constantiality, other than people trying to argue that 448 was wrong for affirming that he was denying double constantiality. It's to me, Occam's razor demands that it was obvious that all the meanwhile he was denying double constantiality.
Yeah. So him not affirming two natures after the union in 448, it does not equal him not believing consubstantiality. So he was restored in 449 because of the emperor, number one, and because an Orthodox confession of faith had already been prepared for him to confess. Whether he was a heretic the whole time or not, we don't know, but eventually it doesn't matter, because we all anathematized him anyway. With what you're saying, and to prove that what I'm trying to tell you about the number of natures after the union, it does not equal the understanding of consubstantiality from Chalcedon itself. The section you read right now from Ephesus 2, when they read it at Chalcedon, they read it in the minutes. I'm not going to read it again because you already read it. The reply at Chalcedon, when those minutes were being read by the Egyptian bishops, the Antiochian bishops, they say, anathema to whoever says two. Okay, during the reading, the most devout Oriental bishops and those with them exclaimed, "No one said this. Dioscoros said this," about the anathema whoever says two. Right? The Egyptians said, the most devout Egyptian bishop said, "We said it then, and we say it now." So they're not hiding. They're at Chalcedon, out in the open. They're saying, yeah, we didn't say two natures. We said anathema to whoever says two natures, and we're still saying anathema to whoever says two natures, even at Chalcedon. So they're not looking at this as a matter of whether or not consubstantiality is the issue. They're looking at it as, after the union, how many natures are there? Natures to them being hypostases.
Now, I want to draw out, because when it comes to, well, let me ask you this question before drawing anything out of it. My apologies.
No problem.
Why doesn't Ephesus 2 clearly affirm double constantiality? From my reading the minutes, it only comes up twice. One in the supposed blasphemies of 448, and they never say, well, we affirm double constantiality. And the other in Theodoret's letter. Let me just look at something, a note. Theodoret has a letter written to the monks, which Ephesus 2 also condemns. And that's the only other document that brings up double constantiality. So what textual basis does Ephesus 2 affirm double constantiality?
I don't have it in front of me, but I would, from what I remember the definitive dogmatic affirmations that were put at Ephesus 2 are 325 Nicaea, the Creed of Nicaea, and the 12 anathemas of Cyril. That's it. So if I think the bishops there were thinking, and it's true to believe this. I think even if you're EO and you believe this, it's still true. If anyone affirms those two things, automatically it includes consubstantiality. You can't believe in the 12 anathemas or the Creed of Nicaea and not believe in consubstantiality. It doesn't work.
All right, so you're saying that conceptually it must match, but we're not giving that same view that conceptually what Leo's saying must match the same idea as well.
Well, if he's saying the opposite.
Because I'm saying conceptually it'd be the same because of what we saw Leo say about one person and the two natures doing what they do. But that being said, in Ephesus 2, when the term consubstantial comes up, it's always addressed and responded to in the negative. And I think that is just a bridge too far to say, well, their decree has the creed and one of Cyril's letters. So they must have not meant it negatively, because that, to me, we'd have to look at, well, how would they interpret those letters in light of them considering blasphemous, someone flat out explaining how double constantiality works, right? Logically speaking, like I said, being that Christ's human nature could not, his humanity couldn't precede his human existence, it only makes sense to talk about his humanity after the incarnation. So it seems to me all those distinctives from Leo, from Chalcedon, are necessary, and they were made on top of this because Ephesus 2 spoke of double constantiality as a blasphemy, and they never address it as anything other than that.
But that's what I'm saying is Ephesus 2 never once condemns consubstantiality. They condemn the two natures after the union. There's a difference.
Well, but the problem is when they condemned it after the very sentence which said both those things. Like when Eusebius d'Orleans was quoted, he said double constantiality, and he said two natures after the union, and then they deny it by rejecting two natures after the union. And so to me, that shows that they saw both as the same thing and they rejected both as the same thing.
I mean, I don't mind you reading it that way, but that's not the way we read it. So
fair enough.
I think it's clear from their reaction about cutting him in two. They're clearly addressing the part about two. They're not addressing the consubstantiality part. But it's up to you.
It seems to me strange that it was left unsaid, considering what was quoted at 448, and which I'll bring up a translation now. This also was, by the way, in Ephesus 2, but I'm bringing up the Price translation because pretty much the way it was cut up in that Syriac manuscript that was in the translation I showed, at least that made it, I think, a little more distilled for the point I wanted to make there. Here I'll read from the Price translation, and we'll give it a go. So Eutyches, the presbyter, said, I did not come here to discuss, this is double constantiality, but I came to inform your sacredness of what I hold. What I hold has been recorded in this document. Give orders for it to be read. The most holy archbishop said, read it yourself. Eutyches, presbyter, said, I'm not able to. The most holy archbishop said, why? Is it really your exposition or someone else's? If it is yours, read it yourself. Eutyches, the presbyter, said, the declaration is mine, but the declaration of the Holy Fathers is the same. The most holy archbishop said, which fathers? Speak for yourself. Why do you need a document? Now Ephesus 2 interrupts. It says, during the reading, John Bishop of Hepha said, as long as he was absent and not expected to attend the assembly, they made a show of promising him every courtesy, but when he presented himself, he was subjected to every inhumanity. Right? So he just pretty much is criticizing this line of questioning, and then we go right back to Constable 448. Eutyches, the presbyter, said, this is what I believe. I worship the Father with the Son with the Father, the Holy Spirit with the Father and the Son. I acknowledge that his coming in the flesh was from the flesh of the Holy Virgin, that he became man perfectly for our salvation. This I confess for the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit for your holiness. Dioscorus, Bishop of Alexandria, said, we accept this declaration. Holy Synod said, this is the faith of the Fathers. Dioscorus, Bishop of Alexandria, said, when your religiousness says this is the faith of the Fathers, whose faith do you mean? Who expounded it? The Holy Synod said, Eutyches, for Eusebius is impious. Dioscorus, Bishop of Alexandria, said, you have heard the faith of Eutyches, Archimandrite. Note how his meaning has become clear to you all. All right? Now, they go back to the reading of Constable 448. The most holy archbishop said, do you acknowledge that the same, so this is after the reading of what he just said. So this is what Flavian wants clarification on. Do you acknowledge that the same one Son, our Lord Jesus Christ, is consubstantial with his Father in respect to the Godhead and consubstantial with his Mother in respect to the manhood? Eutyches, the presbyter, said, when I presented myself to your holiness, I said what I hold about the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Do not examine me on anything else. Right? So I'm just going to interrupt. Go, well, clearly he's not affirming that there. They continue. The most holy archbishop said, do you now acknowledge from two natures? Eutyches, the presbyter, said, since I acknowledge my God and my Lord, as heaven and earth, I have not till today allowed myself to inquire into his nature. But all up till now, I have not described him as consubstantial with us. I now acknowledge it. The most holy archbishop said, do you not say that he's consubstantial with the Father in respect to the Godhood and the same consubstantial with us in respect to the manhood? Eutyches presbyter said, till today I have not said that the body of our Lord and God is consubstantial with us, but acknowledge that the Holy Virgin's consubstantial with us, and their God was in flesh from her. Right? So we just see him literally avoid it. He says the Virgin is consubstantial with us and God is in flesh from her, but he doesn't say that he's consubstantial with the Virgin.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Now, Flavian obviously doesn't think that's a very good answer. So the Virgin from who Christ Lord was in flesh is consubstantial with us. Eutyches presbyter said, I have said that the Virgin's consubstantial with us. The most God-beloved Bishop Basil said, if his mother is consubstantial with us, so is he. For he was called Son of Man. If then his mother's consubstantial with us, then he is too consubstantial with us in respect to the flesh. Eutyches presbyter said, since you now say so, I agree with it all. The most magnificent and glorious former prefect, former consul and patrician Florinius said, since the mother is consubstantial with us, then most certainly the son too is consubstantial with us. Eutyches the presbyter said, till today I did not say this, but I acknowledge it to be the body of God. Are you attending? I did not say that the body of God is the body of man, but that the body is human and the Lord was in flesh from the Virgin. If one must say that he is from the Virgin and so consubstantial with us, then I say this is so, my Lord, with the reservation that he's the only begotten Son of God, Lord of heaven and earth, ruling and reigning with the Father, with whom he also is enthroned and glorified. For I do not say consubstantial in such a way as to deny that he is the Son of God. Before I did not say this of him, I am saying to you that what I think, I did not say originally, but now since your sacredness has said, I say it.
Yeah.
Now it continues, the most holy Archbishop said, so you confess the truth out of compulsion rather than conviction. Right? So I'm just pointing this out because it shows he's going back and forth. He won't just say it. And so he's just calling him out. You're saying this out of compulsion. How does Eutyches respond? For the time being, my Lord, be satisfied with this. Up till this hour, I was afraid to say this, since I acknowledge the Lord our God, and I did not allow myself to inquire into his nature. But since your sacredness enjoins and teaches it, I say it. The most holy Archbishop said, we are not making an innovation, but the fathers define this. And since our faith accords with the faith they define, we wish everyone to abide by it and no one to innovate. The most magnificent and glorious patrician Florinius said, do you say or not that our Lord, who is from the Virgin, is consubstantial with us from two natures at the incarnation? Eutyches presbyter said, I acknowledge that our Lord came into being from two natures before the union, but at the union I acknowledge one nature. Dioscorus, Bishop Alexander said, we all agree with this. The Holy Synod said, we agree. So, right, they're agreeing to the fact this guy is avoiding saying double consubstantiality, which I already read in the previous quote, was lumped among the quotes that were called blasphemies from Dioscorus. Now, Chalcedon says, I'm going to skip this part from Chalcedon because I really want to go 448 and Ephesus 2. I might have went a little too far. Most of the aim, most pious Augusta, take care to part to begin. While he's speaking, Basil. All right, back to Constable 448. The Holy Synod said, you must make a clear confession of faith and anathematize everything contrary to the doctrines have been read. Eutyches the presbyter said, I have said to your sacredness that I did not say this before, but now since your sacredness teaches it, I say and follow the fathers. But I have not found it clearly stated in the scriptures, nor did all the fathers say it. If I anathematize, woe is me, because I anathematize my fathers. Holy Synod said, anathema to him. After this, most holy Archbishop said, let the Holy Synod say what is deserved by a defendant who is neither confesses the Orthodox faith clearly, nor is prepared to accede to the doctrine of the present Holy Synod, but persists in his twisted and wicked perversity. Right? So this would have been the time for Eutyches to say, no, but you're really not forcing me into it. I really do affirm this stuff. Anyway, Lucius, the most God-beloved Bishop of Messia, said he deserves to be deposed. The Holy Archbishop said, if you were to acknowledge his fault and consent to anathematize his doctrine to agree with us who follow the definition of Holy Fathers, then he would reasonably deserve forgiveness. But since he persists in his lawlessness, he will incur the penalties of the canons. Right? So he's accused now of persisting. How does Eutyches respond to that accusation? I say these things since you now ordered it, but I am not ready to anathematize. What I am saying in accordance with the truth. So that was a long one. I'll give you time, Subdeacon. But I just think read in its entirety, it seems to me very hard to see Eutyches as anything other than Eutychian, that Henoticon was right about him, that 448 was right about him, that Chalcedon was right about him. The only people wrong about him was Ephesus 449. And so that's my reading of the primary source there. Let me give you the opportunity to give a contrary interpretation or to agree if you want to.
So I agree that Eutyches was wrong and a heretic for sure. But I want to say that if you notice in everything you read, Eutyches was going along with the consubstantiality, even to the point where he's just qualifying by saying he was afraid to say the consubstantiality because he thought it was taking away from him being the Son of God or from the divinity. But he was willing to say it. The part where he was not willing to say, even under compulsion in that council, was that there were two natures after the union. It's that part that he was anathematized for. So in 449, the consubstantiality is already assumed to have been admitted. I don't want to drive you crazy because I feel like maybe your patience is like your patience is a lot with me. But in 449, it's the same situation where he's exonerated because the consubstantiality, the confession of consubstantiality, even from 448 and from his accepting of orthodoxy in 449 is already there. Him being a secret heretic the whole time or lapsing explicitly later, whatever. But in 449, as far as the council and the emperor were concerned, he was Orthodox. The emperor who's also canonized by the EO. So he was Orthodox according to that confession that he gave in 449. It's his rejection of the two natures after the union that condemned him in 448, not the consubstantiality part. Now, the important thing is, and it's where we've been talking about consubstantiality for a long time, but the important thing with this whole two natures after the union, again, it's not about consubstantiality. It's about, is the incarnation a union of a divine hypostasis and a human hypostasis into one composite hypostasis, or is it not? And is the incarnation just the divine hypostasis with a human nature, and then there are two natures after the union? Which one is patristic? Which one isn't patristic? Chalcedon's formula for what the incarnation is not a patristic one from our view. And that's why Chalcedon can't be accepted, not because of anything having to do with consubstantiality.
Well, but now since your sacredness has said it, Subdeacon, I say it.
So man, I was set up for that one.
So let's so that being the case, let's now talk about the definition of Chalcedon. And I'm going to put forward, I think, is my most I don't have the right word top of my head, but I think the most provocative thesis of mine, which is, I think the decree of Chalcedon bent over backwards to cater itself to Dioscorus, going as far as to quote him. And just so people know, yes, we'll make time for questions. I think this may be our last topic. So guys, you can start asking questions now if you want, but who knows how long we're going to go on this. And so just to bring everyone up to speed, and you could correct me, Subdeacon, that in the decree of Chalcedon, and I'm looking for my little ticker that says questions. Here we go. That in the decree of Chalcedon, they made a draft that everyone that was there pretty much agreed to, other than Dioscorus, he wasn't allowed to be there. And it said of two natures, and pretty much we could only surmise what may be said. We don't know, right? We really don't know at the end of the day. Because it said of two natures, and actually there's one other thing I want to talk about other than this. I don't want to forget it, so let me write it down. But other than that, we have the issue that Leo felt if they say of two natures, being that Eutyches said it, being that Dioscorus said it, they wouldn't be able to humiliate Dioscorus. And the most important thing on earth, apparently, is to humiliate Dioscorus, right? So like, listen, Dioscorus would accept this. They literally say this, by the way. They say Dioscorus would accept this. So you got to write this so he won't accept this.
Yeah.
And so a team is put together of 18 people, 13 of them from Ephesus too. 3 of the 5 people that were deposed in the first session, because they were so reprehensible for what they did at Ephesus 2, are part of that team. So they put together literally the Ephesus 2 dream team. And I argue with the intent to make the best possible synthesis formula that can make all sides happy, other than maybe Dioscorus personally, unless he really eats humble pie. And the fact that everyone realizes that, well, this will make it impossible for Dioscorus to come back. So I think at that point, the true colors of everyone there comes out. They start throwing the Nestorian word. The Roman legates are Nestorians. The Orientals, they're Nestorians. Go back to Rome. They literally say that.
The Illyrians.
The Illyrians, by the way, are under Rome's local jurisdiction.
What a shot at him. And now it's like, imagine Catholics. Imagine somebody says that, like a synod of an area, like in the Roman Catholic jurisdiction, about, go back to Rome. It could be like whatever heresy they have. So they'd probably get excommunicated because Rome would think they have the jurisdiction and all that stuff. At the time, the Illyrians are like, go to Rome. You're a Nestorian. They'll love you there. Rome didn't say anything to them.
No, it's just like in the Meletian Schism, the Illyrians were in communion with Antioch and Rome wasn't. They were much more of a free agent than, again, these later eisegesis of church history leads people to believe.
Yeah.
So that being said, they're like, Nestorians, go back to Rome, because they know that's a shafting. That's a shaft job right there. They had a formula that Flavian himself would accept it, because Flavian never used the word in. Right? So they said, all right, this conceptually will bring Flavian and Leo and Dioscorus all on the same page. And they're literally told, we cannot allow that because Dioscorus would accept this. And so when it becomes clear that they say, well, the Holy Spirit spoke through the original draft. And that's big words, because that's the council saying the Holy Spirit operates through the council and you can't go against the Holy Spirit. And so at that point, the Roman legates say, well, we're going to Rome and we'll have a council there. And the Senate's like, yep, we'll back them up 100% on that. And so, but unless you do this, and so this is the last olive branch put out. Make Leo happy and add these 4 words. And the 4 words, 3 out of the 4 come from Dioscorus himself from the first session. The point is to make sure that no one could construe the definition to divide the one person of Christ into 2 people. Now, let me see. Let me just get the words in front of me real quick. And those words are from Dioscorus. Do you know them on the top of your head?
It was something like inseparable. No, I don't. No, on top of it.
Oh man, why don't we know stuff at the top of the head? What terrible presenters we are. So in session 1, Dioscorus says that add to the definition according to the decree of our most. To the group of former allies, Dioscorus were instructed tactfully. This I'm reading my article by the imperial officials too. I'm going to quote. Add to the definition in accordance to the decree of our Holy Father Leo that there are 2 natures united without change, division. Where did those words without change, division, and confusion come from? Which they say our most Holy Father Leo, that the 2 natures united. Well, if we read session 1, we see what Dioscorus says. He says, we speak of neither confusion or division or change. Anathema to whomever speaks of confusion or change or mixture. So we literally see that the decree of Chalcedon is worded so that way the term in 2 natures cannot be construed in a sense that would be anathematized by Dioscorus. So that way it kind of forced Dioscorus' hands where he could, okay, I'll accept that verbiage because I cannot anathematize it, or just to be a stalwart, which we know all what happened. He was a stalwart. He didn't accept it. So to me, they flat out quote Dioscorus, because it's funny because you actually read Price's footnotes. They're like, these are Cyrillian words, but no one knows where they come from. They come from Dioscorus in the first session. Dioscorus is quoted in the definition. And the idea came from the imperial dignitaries because they did it on purpose. This wasn't random. So I guess my whole point is those who reject the decree of Chalcedon are rejecting an obvious compromise formula whose point was to bring everyone together, including Dioscorus himself, written by his own allies, the majority written by people from Ephesus too. So I'm going to shut up. Subdeacon, your point to clarify, reject, whatever I just said.
So Dioscorus used 3 of the 4. You're absolutely right. But you know who used all 4 of those words?
I don't know, Chalcedon.
Nestorius.
Oh, where did he say that? I'd
He
actually be
says
interested.
I can't remember where. I'll send it to you. He says it. So with, hold on, is this it?
Because that's a real doozy if that's true. And so I'm going to call shenanigans.
Okay. No, I'm not making
because you got to be stupid to do that.
Yeah, he did. But Leo had said it previously before the council. Also, the same words. I think he used also 3 of the 4 Leo had done.
But not in the tome, though.
No, I can't remember where.
It's not in the tome.
Okay. So, but anyways. Oh, is this it? Hold on. Yeah, in the second letter to Sycensis, Cyril's second letter to Sycensis, he quotes Nestorius to say these words.
Okay.
So, all right, here it is. And also in the Bazaar of Heraclitus, he says all 4 of them. And also Nestorius Homily 12.
Bazaar Heraclitus is written after Chalcedon, though.
Yeah.
So do we have something before Chalcedon?
Sure. Homily 12. Nestorius Homily 12. Okay. Yeah. Nestorius Homily 12. It's not the Bazaar. My bad. It's only Homily 12.
Okay.
Okay. So, you want me to read it for you, Craig?
Please.
Okay. For we know not 2 Christs or sons, or only begottens or lords, nor one and another son, nor an original and a new only begotten, nor a first and a second Christ, but one and the same, who is visible in the invisible, and the visible nature. Oh, sorry. Who is visible in the invisible and the visible nature. Can a man, when he hears these things, say that something else was said by him and by those at Chalcedon and by Leo? For openly he is bold and knows the same Christ who is visible and...
Wait, he's quoting Leo in the homily?
Yeah.
Well, then it's written after Chalcedon.
Right.
Well, then that doesn't prove your point.
Yeah. But anyways, he got on board then, at least. But that's fine. Sure. About the...
So my point is, in Chalcedon, because we can't judge them from, like, what nut jobs afterwards subscribe to stuff. The point is, where did Chalcedon get the words?
So using those words, but Craig, Dioscorus was already deposed by that point, so it was done anyways. He was already gone. They took the honorifics away, and he's out. He's already gone. Now, when they're putting that in, it's not even just for Dioscorus' own person, but it's actually for all of the people who go on, like, they identify with this dogma, to the point where the Egyptian bishops, when it came to them to agree, they make the excuse of, well, we have to go ask our pope first. We can't just do it by ourselves. The people are going to kill us. Obviously, they just wanted to get away.
Sucks to get killed.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. So it's just and then, but if Nestorius though is able to, after the council, to say this is what I meant the whole time, yeah, it's convenient, but it, like, he's not I don't believe that he's betraying really what, if you read, because you have the Council of Ephesus book, the Price one. If you read the letters leading up to the council, between him and John of Antioch, he's telling John, he's like, yeah, I know Theodore of Mopsuestia taught us this Theotokos thing. I just think Christokos is a more complete term. Like, he's not saying anything that John himself is disagreeing with, John of Antioch. I don't want to go on a tangent. I'm just trying to show you there could be truth to the idea that Nestorius, even after Chalcedon, is saying this is what I meant the whole time.
I just think in the Bazaar when he says speaks of two hypostases, kind of screws the pooch with that a little bit.
Yes.
Now, last maybe point of discussion. Maybe we'll keep it short so we have audience questions. Guys, write your questions down. Would be, why did the Egyptians interrupt the reading of Cyril's third letter, his 12 anathemas, which was going to be entered into the official minutes of Chalcedon? Why? Which wasn't even in Ephesus. It was read during Ephesus, but not entered into the minutes. So why would the Egyptians interrupt it? It seems like my side, right? If we're going to talk sides, my side's always accused of it, but it was your side that threw the wrench in the works.
Yeah, I don't see how anyone can come up with that reading whatsoever.
Okay, well, let's read it then.
Okay, sure.
Let's see if I could find the page number, because I don't want to mislead people. You know, I could be an idiot, but I don't want to be a jerk. Let's see. I have to find my own. Or where is the citation? So let's see. The Egyptians. Maybe if I put the word Egyptians, I could find it. No, where are you?
Put fathers consult.
Fathers consult.
Yeah, or consult fathers or something.
All right, so we're starting page 27, volume 2. All right, one second. So guys, it's important we're doing this because we are settling this long time-honored issue, right? And now I got to open up my Chalcedon. It's going to take a while, guys. Some PDFs, you can just put the actual, all right, it just reversed itself. So I think actually now I could go back like 420 and we'll be there. Oh man, that was close. All right. So let's read it ourselves. And so this is in session 2, if I remember right. Yeah, it is session 2. And let's see. Where do we start? One second. Very important, guys. We're trying to maybe it's the beginning of page 27. All right, here we go. That's why it starts right here. Right at the end of page 26. Atticus, the most devout bishop of Nicopolis, said, "Since your magnificence is showing readiness to listen with patience, order it to be granted to us that within a few days what is pleasing to God and to the Holy Fathers may be formulated with calm reflection and ruffled thought, since the letter of our Master, Holy Father Archbishop Leo, who administers the Apostolic See, has now been read, we should also be provided with the letter of Blessed Cyril written to Nestorius, in which he urged him to assent to the 12 chapters, so that at the time of the examination we may be found well prepared." So the examination is the writing of the Chalcedon's decree.
Mm-hmm.
Next verse. "The most devout bishops exclaimed, 'If you order this to be granted, we request that the fathers take part in the examination.'" Those are the guys deposed in the first session. 31. "The most magnificent and glorious officials and exalted Senate said, 'The hearing will be adjourned for 5 days, so that in the meantime your holinesses may meet in the residence of the Holy Archbishop Anatolius and deliberate together about the faith, so that objectors may be instructed.' All the most holy bishops exclaimed, 'We believe accordingly. We all believe accordingly. As Leo, so we believe. None of us raises any objections. We have already signed.'" That's the tone. "The most magnificent, glorious officials, exalted Senate said, 'It is not necessary for you to all meet, but since it is appropriate to convince all the objectors, let the most devout Archbishop Anatolius select from among the bishops who have signed those he considers competent to instruct the objectors.' The most devout bishops exclaimed, 'We have a request concerning the fathers. Restore the fathers to the council. Those who agree with Leo to the council. The fathers to the council. Report our acclamations to the emperor. Report these petitions to the Orthodox one. Report these petitions to the Augusta. We have all erred. Forgive us all.'" All right, now guys, pay attention. So twice the letter is interrupted. Bring back the fathers. They decide, okay, we're going to go talk for 5 days. Bring back the fathers. The clerics Constantinople exclaimed, "Only a few are clamoring. The council is not speaking." The most devout Oriental bishops and those with them exclaimed, "The Egyptians into exile." The Egyptian to exile. The most devout Illyrian bishops and those with them exclaimed, "We beg you, have mercy on us all." The most devout Oriental bishops and those with them exclaimed, "The Egyptian into exile." The most devout Illyrian bishops and those with them exclaimed, "We have all sinned, have mercy on us all." These acclamations to the Orthodox Temple, the churches are divided. The clerics of Constantinople exclaimed, "The Ostrogoths into exile. God has opposed the Ostrogoths." The most devout bishops and those with them exclaimed, "We have all sinned, forgive us all." The Ostrogoths to the council. The Ostrogoths to the churches. May no misfortune occur in your time. The clerics then called the Ostrogoths a Jew. The most devout Oriental bishops exclaimed, "The Egyptian into exile, the heretic into exile." The most devout Illyrian bishops and those of them exclaimed, "Restore the fathers to the council." The most magnificent and glorious officials, exalted Senate said, "The proposals will be put into effect." All right. And so what we see there is the people interrupting about bringing the fathers back that interrupted reading were the Illyrians. All right. And perhaps there's Egyptian agitation. I'm not sure. But that being said, they're the ones who interrupted. And so they responded, "The Egyptian to exile," which I presume is the Oscars. And so, as we see, the third letter could have been read, but the pro-Dioscorus faction and those who want to restore Juvenal and the other Ephesus 2 guys, they're the ones who stopped it from being read. And so, what do you have to say, old Subdeacon?
That's not at all what I understood, Craig.
Or what did he understand? Tell us what you understood.
I understood when the guy brought it up, the first guy, Atticus, I think. It just said the bishops exclaimed. It doesn't say from where. The bishops exclaimed something about consulting and whatever, right? The fathers. And then later, it doesn't get brought up again, the 12 chapters explicitly like that. And then all the other bishops just take turns yelling out stuff. And then eventually it gets down to the Illyrians after there's a group that's been yelling, "Leo to the churches, restore Leo, whatever, forgive us." And then after that, the last ones who say anything are the Illyrians. The whole time everybody's yelling everything. The Egyptians, I didn't see them mentioned there. And then the first people who interrupt are not the pro-Dioscorus faction at all. And it's actually an Oriental Orthodox criticism that is 1,500 years old. And we have been telling the Chalcedonians, "Why didn't you guys read the third letter?" And the Chalcedonians have never once, until Craig Truglia, 2022, is telling us, "Well, we tried. You guys interrupted us." You know.
Well, so are you saying the whole council in unison and not the Illyrians, who were identified as literally saying "bring back the fathers," weren't the ones who were saying that?
The Illyrians were saying that, but I'm saying.
And so them clamoring for the fathers is what interrupted its reading. It was about to be read.
No, but the group of bishops that interrupted the readings, that wasn't the Illyrians or the Egyptians. It doesn't say who it was. It just said the bishops. And then after them, it's the bishops who love Leo. And then after them, it's the ones who hate the Dioscoros, the Antiochians. It's a long line of synods until you eventually get to the Illyrians.
Well, it wasn't the Orientals that asked for the restoration of the fathers, right?
It was them who said about Leo, bring back Leo.
But they weren't talking about the restoration of the fathers.
No, the Illyrians.
Okay. And it wasn't the Roman legates asked for the restoration of the fathers.
Yeah, I don't know.
Who's that leave?
The Illyrians, but we're talking about the interruption.
But that's my point. The interruption was bring back the fathers. And so if the Orientals would have not said that interruption and the Roman legates would have not said that interruption, who does that leave?
But the interruption already happened.
Yeah, but the interruption was bring back the fathers. So you have to look at what the interruption was. That reveals who stopped the reading, right? So who interrupted is the person who stopped the reading of the third letter. And if we already established it wasn't the Orientals that interrupted that reading, because they would have not said bring back the fathers, and it wasn't the Roman legates that interrupted the reading, because they're not the ones that said bring back the fathers, then that leads that only leads the pro-Dioscorus party.
The interruption wasn't bring back the fathers. The interruption was, can we go back to consult the fathers or something like that? And then they
Well,
said, okay,
maybe
fine.
I'll eat humble pie right now, like Eutyches and Dioscorus. 1 second. Let's look.
Okay.
Da-da-da. All right, like it says, we should also be provided that the letter of the Blessed Cyril, is this still being shared or no?
I don't see it. No.
Now you do.
And then what is it says if you
right, we should also be provided with the letter. Okay, how about you read it? Because you'll give a different. Start with we.
Okay. We should also be provided with the letter of the Blessed Cyril written to Nestorius, in which he urged him to assent to the 12 chapters, so that at the time of the examination we may be found well prepared. The most devout bishops exclaimed, "If you order this to be granted, we request that the fathers take part in the examination." It's just a request. They're not interrupting anything. What does the footnote say? 84.
I'll scroll to the bottom, but it would have been read if they said read it. And they said, if it be granted, we must restore the fathers, which forces them to now not read it and then go to other orders of business. No, 84 says C34 with our note. So now I'm not going to dig through that.
That's fine. But it's just, they're just requesting it. It's an ecumenical council. They could be like, no, we're going to read this even if it takes us till
But look at the nature of the request. If you need the restoration of the fathers in order to grant, if you order this to be granted, we request this to happen, then they actually have to go close the session and do other things beforehand so that they could do it.
And they should have done that. Why not?
Why not? Well, because they wanted to screw over Dioscorus. So my point is they purposely picked something like a wrench in the works to stop its reading. Footnote 34, and it has nothing to do with what it says there, so don't know.
But I don't it's not like the non-Chalcedonians didn't want the third letter to be read. That's just ridiculous. I mean, this is what we would want to be read.
Unless the idea was to strategize to bring back Dioscorus. And so they were purposely stopping it being read because they're hoping that could bring back Dioscorus.
But if it was read and then the formula is based on it, then that's a better chance of bringing back Dioscorus.
They didn't want to bring back Dioscorus. That's my point. So they purposely made a set of conditions that wouldn't be accepted. Okay. And because it wouldn't be accepted, that was a purposeful way of preventing that third letter by being entered into the minutes.
Right.
And so to me, they weren't being stupid or random. That was a very purposeful decision to stop that third letter from entering the minutes because it was hoping that it could be leveraged to bring back Dioscorus, and the other side was definitely not going to bring back Dioscorus.
So then why didn't the other side eventually get to that letter anyway?
Oh, why didn't they?
Yeah.
Because I suppose that session 2 is the only session where they read the canonical letters, and they didn't reopen another session. They went right to the definition at that point.
So session 2, was where they read the canonical letters. This is session 2, what we just read from?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. So then you're saying it was too late. That was it. They weren't going to read it.
Yes. Would I have ran things that way? No. But clearly, with inertia and how things were going, they didn't reopen a session in order to read more canonical letters.
So I still think it's speculation for us to assume the intention of like who is. It's fair, but it's speculation to assume who is interrupting and what the reason for their leverage about Dioscorus and all that. We're reading into it. It's not explicit.
Fair enough. Here's the only thing we know with certainty. Yeah. Those who wanted Dioscorus and his accomplices brought back were the ones that interrupted the reading. Now, whether their intention was to permanently prevent the reading from ever occurring or whatnot requires interpretation. But what can't be disputed is it was going to be read, and then they made a request contingent upon it being read. This must happen, and then it was never read. So it not being read is their fault. Whether or not they wanted it to be their fault, whether if they could have done it again, they would have done it different. We could all speculate.
You're saying they said it so that there's a chance that Dioscorus could be restored, and that's why
they wanted Dioscorus back to the very end.
Yeah.
That's my argument. And
That would have
and I don't think it's
we
crazy.
We would be united today.
And we would be.
Yeah.
Because I think all the stuff happened after that. Because I think it's not crazy to think if the Oscars would have ate humble pie, just said the word in, accepted his words as the meaning for that word in, into natures. If that would have occurred, he would have not become patriarch again, but he might have been like Domnus was the guy that kept on, right?
Yeah.
Like Domnus at Antioch. So he probably would have just been given a pension. He would have not been given the title of bishop, but he would have been in the church. And sort of like Severus and Theophilus of Alexandria and other guys, sometimes when you're a patriarch in exile, you might be restored at some point. And there's been bishops that have been restored. So it would have not been a ridiculous like exile until you can make a comeback, but the Oscars would have none of it. And that's what Domnus did. It's not like the council didn't do stuff like that. So to me, I personally think, and that's the whole thesis of my article, is that this whole schism started really because of one man's wrong political maneuvering, and that man's the Oscars. Because I don't think conceptually they were different at Chalcedon. And I think some of the wrong moves made at Chalcedon all revolved around him. And if he only ate humble pie, the theology was not the issue. Ultimately speaking, even the procedures were not the issue. It just required him eating humble pie, accepting Leo back in communion, accepting conceptually they're talking about the same thing. And again, if they weren't, that's unacceptable. But that's the position I'm coming from. So that'd be my last words. Let me give you yours, and then we can take some audience questions.
Do you believe, Craig, it's just a question off of what you just said.
Sure.
Do you believe, so then you said if conceptually he wasn't different anyway, so you believe that he wasn't a heretic?
No, I don't think Dioscorus was actually a Christological heretic because he affirms double consubstantiality in private correspondence. It's just canonically, when it was brought up, he called it blasphemy. When Eutyches was brought up the question, he defended him twice, in Chalcedon and Ephesus. So it's sort of like the official Dioscorus is a heretic, but the real private Dioscorus isn't. I
see. Okay. Sounds good.
All right. And your last words?
Oh. So, yeah, I mean, me and you, we've been talking about this for a long time, years. I think I've known you a couple of years now, right, Craig?
It's scary. I think it's coming 3 years at this point.
Is it? Wow. Oh, wow.
Took you a long time to get married, bro.
Yeah. Seriously. So coming into this conversation, I don't think that we like, oh, we're gonna fix this 1,500-year-old thing, me and Craig, you know. But it's always good to talk to you about it, to like bounce ideas off each other, pick each other's brains. You hear new things, like we learn from each other and whatever. I think that I hope future conversations regarding this topic can look like the way me and you talk to each other, not to like puff us up, but I like the way we talk about it more than when I see like people debating these things, because we don't agree, but it's still a civil conversation. You know what I mean?
It's well said, Subdeacon, because that's been on my mind. I won't get into details, but like I talk to human beings in the real world. I'm not just like I type on the computer. It's the only time I ever talk about theology. And you kind of wonder, like, I won't talk up to another human being in the real world in this divisive way. Why is this format on the internet so divisive, so disrespectful, that we'd be ashamed of ourselves in public if people knew like what we're doing on the internet? That's wrong. We shouldn't be ashamed, because forget what other people know. God knows your heart. He sees absolutely everything. And so we need to be able to disagree in a respectful way. And quite frankly, you're just a great intercolluder. You're a great person to speak with. You're a stand-up guy. I won't say more because why puff you up? It's no good for you.
I'm really nothing.
Well, I mean, look at that hoodie. It looks like you're going to stab me. Look at that. This Arab guy's going to stab me.
I have this on because my hair is really long and I can't get it to look anything.
Well, look at me. I'm Bart Simpson. Don't have a cow, man. So I appreciate your kind words, and to be honest, it's a it's a big reason why like apologetics is something I'm going to have to like be backing out of increasingly. It's not edifying people if we can't if we can't talk in a way in which will edify people, it just makes people angry, then I don't know if it's working. As much as I love history and trying to help people with history, it's that's why I need the second guy, because when I'm alone, it's just me bouncing off myself. It doesn't go anywhere good.
That's how I feel when I'm doing these shows by myself on my channel. I need people with me. It's weird.
Well, we got a show January 2nd, right?
Yes.
We're going to be talking about Julianism. So
Awesome.
Tune into the Daniel Kakish channel. So here's a question. We'll start doing some audience questions. If the natures are hypostases per the third anathema, then how can these two natures remain two and not a composite one after the union? Could you translate that for me, Subdeacon?
So I think he's referring to follow the chair. Seems like a Roman Catholic, huh?
I think he's Oriental Orthodox, actually.
Oh, okay. So I think he's by the third anathema. He's talking about Cyril, third anathema of Cyril in the 12.
Okay.
And he's saying, "Well, can you put it up? Back up the question, so I remember."
Oh yeah, I always put it down because I don't want to cover my beautiful face.
The natures of hypostases per the third anathema. Then how can those two natures remain two and not a composite one after the union? Right. I would say that they would become one. They wouldn't remain two after the union.
Yeah, it says here, like third anathema, if anyone shall after the union divide the hypostases in the one Christ, join them by that connection alone, which happens according to worthiness or even authority and power, not rather by coming together, which is made by natural union, let them be anathema. So I'm thinking his point is saying that the term hypostases is being used as the term nature there, right? I guess that's his point, right? Because there's two hypostases.
Yeah.
And I guess just my response is we got to deal with concepts here, right? Like, we're speaking about Latin theology, not using those words, and we have to honestly speak of the same concept, because if we get stuck on that, then the Nicene Creed becomes a problem, right? Because that uses the word hypostasis differently. So that would be my response.
So you're saying like natures is hypostasis in this context?
That's what it appears to be.
Yeah,
otherwise what else could that be? How could Christ be two persons? So that's what it looks like. But I'll let smarter people correct me on that. Here looks like an interesting comment. When the bishops from each side meet for whatever reason, the word ecumenism is automatically used in a negative. So there we go. We got someone on the internet that actually is not panning ecumenism. Congratulations. We have Paul Ibrahim, I'm guessing, saying a bunch of angry stuff, but if he has a question, I'll answer, or more of a singular point. I can't read them all.
That's funny.
Let's see. Speculation on steroids. Good old Alan Rule. Equal opportunity hater is a Roman Catholic. Let's see. It starts with if. Maybe it's a hypothetical question. If St. Damasus just anathematized St. Athanasius, St. Cyril, and said into nature at the union, it would all have been fine. There, I guess that's a rhetorical question. There you go. I think Paul might have a question here. Let's see. I always disappoint Paul. I try my best for you. 1 second. Why in the second session only the two letters Cyril read before the tome? All right. My answer is actually at the end of session 1. 1 second. Let me read it. It's page 1067, I think. No. That's the stupid me. It's page 365. Says the most glorious officials and Senate said, let each of the most devout bishops of the present Holy Council set out in writing what he believes without any anxiety, right? So they can only base what they decree on the following. With the fear of God for his eyes, recognizing the beliefs of our most divine and pious master Marcion in accord with the creed of the 318 Holy Fathers in Nicaea and the creed of the 150 Fathers after that, with the canonical letters and expositions of the Holy Fathers Gregory, Basil, Hilary, Athanasius, and Ambrose, and with the two canonical letters of Cyril, which were approved and published at the First Council of Ephesus. So approved and published is what I want to emphasize, is that even though the third letter of Cyril was read out during Ephesus, it wasn't acclaimed. It didn't have subscribers after it, like the second letter was. So the second letter was published. It's the canonical letter of that council. And the letter to John of Antioch is the other one that's canonical because, again, it has people subscribing to it. And so that's my point. It's not that they denied the third letter. They tried reading the third letter. It would have been read if it weren't for you, Paul. You yourself, you time traveled, I tell you. But so that's not the issue. The issue is it was just a procedural thing of what was published, what was affirmed canonically by the council by subscription. So that would be my interpretation. And he continues, why was the third left out of the first session readings of 431 and 449 and left out of 448? The third letter wasn't left out of the 431 council. I don't remember the minutes of 449, but I don't think any of us would dispute that 449 would have affirmed the third letter. And being left out of 448, they simply only read the published letters. To impute any motive beyond that, I just don't see it being merited, simply because I don't see the conceptual demands that they're actually teaching a theology that would have refuted it. Now, that does not mean, by the way, that those on the Chalcedonian side would not later reject that third letter. I think wrongly. In fact, the Church of Florence rejected the 12 anathemas into the 7th century. That's scary. That's even after it was affirmed by the 5th Ecumenical Council. So, yes, it became a real issue that Miaphysites should be concerned about for the Chalcedonian side. But again, that's reading to the future what happened at Chalcedon itself. And same with Constable 448. So that would be my view. Do you want to add any comments on that question?
Yeah, it's like you said. In 2022, when we're looking back and we're looking at this as like one big thing together, right? One clunk of history. It's where we're kind of tying it back into the later arguments, the 3 chapters controversy. Why, accept the 12 chapters? Why didn't you read it here and here and here? Yeah. So and we would say the exonerations of the guys we mentioned earlier, plus the not reading of the 12 chapters, that leaves space for the controversies that happen later.
I think when it comes to context, both of our readings are separated by this. You read a broader context. You read into, you're citing 4th century, you've in the past cited 6th century and stuff. You go, well, look at this whole school of Chalcedonian thought and whole school of Cyrillian thought over this broad period of time. My analysis of this era is actually very focused, if you've noticed, to really immediately the tome, Ephesus 2, Leo's correspondence, Chalcedon, what Dioscorus written immediately after Chalcedon. And so I think that if that affects the interpretation, maybe a good debate could be had. We won't settle tonight. What's the better way of interpreting that era of history? This kind of strict, narrower context or this broader context? Because I think those are the 2 different lenses that are used. Quick question. Why did the session after 5 days mentioned by commissioners never happen? I don't know. I mean, some sort of session happened because they did make a draft definition, so I'm not exactly sure. I didn't count the days. Ellen Rule says, question for Subdeacon. From an Oriental Orthodox perspective, did Constable 553 succeed in making Chalcedon more attractive, if not fully convincing? So if 553 was what happened in 451, would you affirm it?
So I used to say yes to this. In the show I did with you and Med White, it was us 3 only. I said yes to this question, I think, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
Now I don't say yes anymore. And the reason why is because...
You're getting closer to the priesthood.
Perfect timing. No.
There you go.
The reason why is because I think that the understanding of what the hypostatic union is comprised of shifted, and I didn't know that at the time. So I assumed that we had the same understanding of what the hypostatic union is in the first place, and we're just not agreeing on a number, a matter of a number, if there's 1 or 2. But then later I found out that it's possible. I haven't even concluded this, but it's possible that our understandings of what the incarnation is, the hypostatic union is, we don't agree on what the union actually is in the first place. And if that's the case, I attribute that to the time around Constantinople II, and before and after it, leading up to that council.
All right, a question for you. Do you affirm no salvation inside the church or not?
Yes.
All right, so we both will have to pray for each other. We have let's see. Which, by the way, I do pray for you. So there you go.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Craig.
What's the Coptic position of Jesus saying, "Let not my will be done, but yours"? If there are not two natures, human and God. That's a good question, but I know there's a good answer. So please pose that, Daniel.
Sure. So I'm not Coptic, but I think I can still answer the question.
You're closer to Coptic than I am.
Yeah. So when he's saying "not my will but yours," I hope, and I don't. You as a Chalcedonian, I'm assuming, are not allowed to even say that that's the two wills, because that would be the two talking to each other. Where it's like, not my will but yours. Who's Jesus talking to? He's talking to his divinity. So now there's two talking to each other.
I can actually give you the answer for Maximus when you're ready.
Please do. And then we would say this is God the Son talking to God the Father. The divinity talking to each other. That's Nestorianism. Go ahead, Craig.
It's now when he says "not my will, but your will be done," he is talking to the Father, but there's a singular divine will. So there's not three hypostatic wills where each person of the Godhead has different wills, but there's a singular divine will because there's a singular divine essence. Will comes from essence. So that comes from that sort of philosophical category. So when he's saying "not my will, your will be done," he could effectively be talking to himself, really, because it's the same divine will. So he's saying not that not my human will be done, but the divine will be done. Why? Because the human will, without sin, should want to live, right? And so it takes a deliberate, voluntary death to decide, well, even though it's good not to die, that's a natural good. That's the very, rule number one of natural goods: don't die, right? Otherwise, your nature doesn't exist anymore. So not die. So the idea is that that's a demonstration of his voluntary death, because according to his natural, good, sinless human will, he would not want to die. But according to his good divine will, the will of the Father, because they share that divine will, he has the will to die. So that's Nestorius. The Theodore of Mopsuestia had a really heretical interpretation. So here's the flip side of how a heretic would interpret it. He said, well, Christ, according to his divine will, want the right thing, but the human wanted the wrong thing, right? And so if you notice, the way Maximus explains this has a very different anthropological assumption behind it, which is it's actually good to want not die, while Theodore of Mopsuestia's whole view is, well, no, Christ in his humanity actually wanted the wrong thing. He didn't want the right thing, so which is anathema.
Craig, just a quote to back up what we're saying, both of us. This is from Saint Basil. I've Saint Basil and Saint Gregory on this topic. Is it to fulfill what was spoken in the Acts? The multitude of believers were of one heart and soul. No one, that is, erecting his own will, but all in common, seeking in the one Holy Spirit the one will of the Lord Jesus Christ, who said, "I am coming down from heaven, not to do my will, but the will of the Father who sent me." And who says, for this reason, not for these only do I ask, but also for those who believe in me through their word, that all may be one. Let them quote in the seventh place that the Son came down from heaven not to do his own will, but the will of him that sent him. Well, if this had not been said by himself who came down, we should say that the phrase was modified as issuing from the human nature, not from him who is conceived of in his character as the Savior, for his human will cannot be opposed to God, seeing it is altogether taken into God, but conceived of simply as in our nature, inasmuch as the human will does not completely follow the divine, but for the most part struggles against and resists it. For we understand in the same way the words, "Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, let not what I will, but your will prevail." For it is not likely that he did not know whether it was possible or not, or that he would oppose will to will. But since, as this is the language of him who assumed our nature, for he it was who came down, and not of the nature which he assumed. We must meet the objection in this way, that the passage does not mean that the Son has a special will of his own besides that of the Father, but that he has not, so that the meaning would be, not to do my own will, for there is none of mine apart from, but that which is common to me and you. For as we have one Godhead, so we have one will.
All right. So it's a lot there. We'll have to rewind it for me to get more out of that anyway.
Yeah.
It's so we have this with Ian. Doesn't the tome of St. Leo mention the perpetual virginity? If so, doesn't that mean perpetual virginity was mentioned by ecumenical council before Second Constantinople? I don't remember perpetual virginity. We've had earlier councils like the Council of Rome make mention of it.
Council of 431 also.
So yeah, it's the Tome of Leo does, by the way, make mention of Theotokos having original sin, but Roman Catholics ignore that. So anyway, I'm sorry.
I said I didn't know that.
He does. He says that Christ assumed nature, not sin, from his mother. What else could that mean?
Wow.
What else could that mean? I'm just saying, why say that if that's not what it means? So
that's in the tome.
That's in the tome. Christ assumed our nature from his mother, not sin.
Wow.
So, and again, this is not like one thing out of context. He's got multiple Christmas homilies where he explains how the Theotokos was cleansed by the enunciation of original sin. So it's it makes sense. He got this from Augustine, by the way. So Leo's just reading Latin theology and repeating what Augustine, who flat out actually mentioned the Theotokos being conceived in sin, using the Latin word concepto or conceptio. So it's really not surprising. It's just surprising because of later what Roman Catholics dogmatized. That It seems like, it couldn't possibly say that, but it does. Other people need to publish on this. It's a footnote in my own article, but I've said elsewhere, this is something that merits an article in its own right. Just the whole view of the Theotokos original sin in Latin theology, which was definitely there. Let's see if other questions. Paul, go easy on me. Is it heretical to refuse to say two natures after the union? But we do say two natures after the union.
He's asking you if it's heretical for us to not say that.
To not say it?
Yeah.
Well, you'd have to affirm the council. As long as you affirm that what you believe is conceptually identical to that, it would be the same thing as saying it. So I don't see how else to put it. Here's one for you. Do Oriental Orthodox people venerate Eastern Orthodox icons? I guess, do you ever see something done the Russian style and venerate it, or no?
I mean, is he asking if random lay people do it, or if it's in the churches? I'm not sure, but I mean, if it's saints that we also have, but an Eastern Orthodox made the icon, then yeah, I think that they would still be venerated.
Yeah, I mean, the Eastern Orthodox have had union icons that have been venerated, and in the end of the day, it's the type representation, the prototype that matters, right? Mm-hmm. So it's you wouldn't want something with heretical symbolism, and not for nothing, there are Oriental Orthodox icons where Christ has one finger and it's supposed to mean one incarnate nature, and so we wouldn't want that in church. I have one T-shirt with it, by the way.
Send it over, bro. Ship it to me.
I have a T-shirt with it. I made it with Vistaprint or something. No, it's with a local place, actually, Ballston Spa, New York. But it's so generally not for the stuff. But if it's something without the symbolism where it would create a theological issue, there's been crossover in the past. That's all I can say.
The icon of Christ in my parish has the one finger.
There you go. There you go. Let's see. What do you make of Saints Theodotus, Arcadius, and Cyril, all presiding at Ephesus, all denouncing two natures after the union, accepting one nature in their writings? Again, we deal with these things conceptually like we would deal with the Nicene Creed and the later Cappadocian Fathers, who are both our saints, when they deal with the particular hypostasis doctrine. So we deal with concepts, not strictly with words. Believe We believe facts rather than words, to quote Gregory the Great. Let's see. Well, I think someone's now asking the other chair. Isn't this Father Rowan Williams? Thoroughly enjoyed the show. Thank you both. I just subscribed to Lion's Den. How can I get contact Subdeacon Daniel? Well, you could go to Daniel Kakish, the YouTube channel. I presume you're pretty easy to find in Facebook Messenger. And
I'm on Facebook Messenger. I don't have social media like for the most part, but I have Facebook Messenger. I have Twitter.
And you can join the Apostolic Christian Discord group, link below, and you can talk to both of us because we're both moderators there.
So Father Roman, he's Eastern Orthodox priest.
No, he's Oriental Orthodox. I think he does a lot of translations, if I remember right. And if I'm wrong, man, forgive me, but I'm pretty sure he does translations and stuff. Let me see.
Is he Coptic or Syriac? Do you know?
Oh, I'm trying to find out. Hope I'm not really wrong. I'd be very embarrassed. And Archbishop of Canterbury has the same exact name, so this makes stuff confusing in my brain. Oh, well, you'll have to identify yourself. I'm sorry. I might be confusing you with another guy. So we shall find out. Let's see. You got people telling people who you are. Can I get Craig's thoughts on Isidore Seville's accepting the 3 chapters? He calls them the 3 chapters of Chalcedon and refers to Theodore as an illustrious teacher of the church. Again, Isidore Seville would have been, well, actually, no. The Spanish Synod didn't accept the 5th Council into the 700s. And so I would just say what you're saying is actually possible. I actually found Council Toledo, I forget what year in the 700s, still didn't accept the 5th Council. So I'm going to actually say what you're saying is theoretically possible. I don't like admitting stuff like that about the saints. And without reading St. Isidore, I couldn't say more. But it is theoretically possible because the Council of Toledo did not accept the 5th Council. So I don't know what exactly his views of that were. Interesting thing to say, though. Let's say. Well, Shining Diamond says he didn't accept the 3 chapters. So there you go. We got our answer. We might be out of questions when they argue each other. And how about in the meantime, you give your plugs, Subdeacon?
Sure. So thank you, Craig, for putting me in the, what is it called, the thing under the video?
The description.
The description, yes. For my channel, like Craig said, we're gonna have one coming up on January 2nd on Julianism. I'm excited for that. I'm kind of been slow getting stuff out, but it's gonna start coming up more often. I just kind of had to get used to this new married life, the scheduling of everything, how that works.
Baby's on the way, Subdeacon.
I don't know, God's will, whatever He wants. So yeah, it's exciting. Subscribe to that. Follow me. We will talk about cool stuff. It's going to be interesting. We're going to talk about a lot of the Syriac tradition stuff too. It's
real exciting. I'm happy you've made your channel. We've talked about this now for I think 2 years.
Yeah.
And I look forward to actually, because there's stuff like that wouldn't make sense in my channel for me to present, but sadly it would be from the foreigner's perspective in more ways than one. But stuff on Julianism that, like, reading all of Severus and Julian Helicarnas's correspondence on that issue, and stuff from the Dormition homilies of Theophilus of Alexandria and Jacob of Sarug. So there's a lot of interesting material that I haven't been able to get into my own channel because it's not immediately relevant for Eastern Orthodox audience, which I look forward to doing for your audience. So it's great to have you there and doing that. And like I said, I think you eventually will just need to keep bringing on intercluders. That way they don't see evil Subdeacon Daniel Kakish with his hood,
I just need a haircut. That's all I
So
need.
subdeacon in the hood, you know.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'll give my plugs, which is orthodoxchristiantheology.com/donate. Scrolling on the bottom. If this has blessed you, please bless the churches in Cambodia. $1, $5 we need consistent support to support those churches. I am literally selling myself out, making documentary films to raise money for this church, but I don't have to make documentaries. You can just do it out of the goodness of your heart too. So please give money to orthodoxchristiantheology.com/donate if you want to bless the churches in Cambodia and support them. Also, pray for me. Pray for Subdeacon as well. That is much any like Jordanville Holy Trinity Monastery. Anyone that is not been shut down during COVID, that's doing the right thing, please support them financially, and God will bless you. Maybe not financially, but He will bless you spiritually, as all almsgivings will do for you if done in faith. So again, that's orthodoxchristiantheology.com/donate. For those not aware, we've reached our dollar amount in order to start the production of the film. So production has started. Hopefully by Christmas. I'm not sure if I'll release on Christmas because no one will watch it, but by around Christmas, the finished documentary for Errors the Catholics should be out. So that will be, I'm hoping, one of my last forays in the apologetics world, because it's so concise and covers so many important issues. There really is not much more to say. And so trying to empty out what I have left in my basement, where I even really need to be doing this, at least on a consistent basis anymore. So check that out. You can go to orthodoxchristiantheology.com/donate. You could give money anyway, even though you won't be executive producer of the film at this point. So there you go. So Subdeacon, you've been on for hours. Thank you so much. I think this has probably been the most substantive, in-depth conversation on this issue that has yet occurred. And so it's been a great honor to do that with you. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Craig. I really appreciate it again, always. Looking forward to our next one together.
I do too. Well, guys, subscribe to Subdeacon Daniel. And most of all, remember these words of Jesus Syriac: fight to death for the truth. The Lord God will fight for you. God bless you. Have a great day.